Chapters 53. At the mention of what happened in the ghost dwelling back then, Bai Xiaoxiao's expression began to change. It was a look of pure terror. Seeing this reaction from Bai Xiaoxiao, Ning Qushui couldn't help but feel intensely curious about what exactly had transpired in their ghost dwelling. In his mind, Bai Xiaoxiao was an incredibly calm and collected woman. She had survived numerous life and death situations. Regardless of her overall experience, purely in terms of psychological fortitude, she vastly surpassed ordinary people. Yet even someone as unflappable as Bai Xiaoxiao was visibly terrified. However, conversely, Bai Xiaoxiao seemed reluctant to explain everything clearly, speaking in vague, halting sentences. After that incident, more than half the people in our ghost dwelling died. Most of the veterans perished. We were forced to take their places and inherit their will, occasionally having to participate in extremely dangerous crimson doors to complete our tasks. Although Bai Xiaoxiao didn't specify exactly what happened, Ning Qushui could deduce that it was directly tied to the jigsaw puzzle piece hidden within their ghost dwelling. They died because of that puzzle piece. Bai Xiaoxiao remained silent for a long time before finally nodding. She let out a heavy sigh. What if you simply chose not to pursue that puzzle piece? Ning Qushui asked, genuinely curious. Bai Xiaoxiao looked at him, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I know what you're thinking. After all, if someone simply continuously participates in low-difficulty Crimson Door tasks, they can practically guarantee a very high survival rate. Especially after acquiring a ghost artifact, it seems almost impossible to fail. You're definitely thinking that, aren't you? Ning Qushui nodded slightly. That was exactly what he was thinking. Bai Xiaoxiao sighed again. In the mist-shrouded world, every chosen person must survive exactly 9 crimson doors. The first 3 doors appear 1 week apart. The 4th through 6th doors appear 6 months apart. The 7th through 9th doors appear 1 year apart. And naturally, the difficulty of each crimson door exponentially exceeds the last, with the exception of special, anomalous cases like yourself. According to our statistics, the mortality rate for the 7th door is already a staggering 95.796%. The 8th and 9th doors don't even need to be mentioned. They are practically guaranteed death. Therefore, in order to escape this place and break the curse before the 7th crimson door arrives, every single member of a ghost dwelling will desperately exhaust every possible means to collect those puzzle pieces. And these life-threatening puzzle pieces only begin to appear after surviving the exceptionally difficult 4th crimson door. Only a ghost dwelling that possesses a complete jigsaw puzzle earns the right to enter the final destination of the mist-shrouded world. Ning Qushui frowned. The final destination of the mist-shrouded world, what exactly is there? Bai Xiaoxiao shook her head, a trace of confusion swirling in her clear eyes. I don't know. Everyone who has ever entered the final destination of the mist-shrouded world has never returned. If that's the case, how can you be so certain that entering the final destination will actually break the curse of the crimson doors? Faced with Ning Qushui's razor-sharp question, Bai Xiaoxiao fell into a long, heavy silence. Actually, sometimes you don't necessarily need absolute proof that something is true. Humans are incredibly fragile creatures. We just have to find a reason to keep living, don't we? Ning Qushui and Bai Xiaoxiao looked at each other for a long moment, then both nodded slightly. That makes sense. It truly made sense. Faced with a near 100% mortality rate at the 7th crimson door, it was better to desperately try to collect the puzzle pieces and reach the final destination to see what was there. Even if they died, at the very least they could satisfy their dying curiosity. For those cursed within the ghost dwellings, the puzzle pieces acted as a psychological anchor, a desperate sliver of hope for survival. And for those trapped in absolute despair, there is nothing more precious than hope. Regarding the violent conflicts between Bai Xiaoxiao's group and rival ghost dwellings over these puzzle pieces, Ning Qushui didn't press further. First, there was absolutely nothing he could do to help right now. Second, Ning Qushui despised getting dragged into unnecessary trouble. Of course, if Bai Xiaoxiao explicitly asked for his help, that would be a different story. All right, it's almost 3 a.m. We've talked long enough. You should go get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a brutal battle. Ning Chishui nodded slightly. He had a rough idea of the nightmare they were about to face. He stood up and walked into the bedroom, preparing to get some rest. Sitting behind him, Bai Xiaoxiao rested her chin in her hand, tilting her head as she watched his retreating back. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, lost in unknown thoughts. Finally, dawn broke on the 6th day. The group's overall mental state was terrible. Not only had they been forced to take turns keeping watch all night, but knowing that Guangxu, the apocalyptic boss of this Crimson Door, had descended from the mountain peak kept everyone on edge, terrified of falling into a deep sleep. As soon as the sun rose, the group hurried to the large dining hall to wait. They wanted to eat a full, hearty breakfast before plunging into the village to search for the benevolent monk's skull. But today, something was deeply wrong. The dining hall staff, who usually arrived very early, were completely absent. The group waited from 5 a.m. until 9 a.m., but not a single worker showed up. This sudden, bizarre anomaly filled everyone with a creeping sense of dread, as if a suffocating shadow had fallen over them. What the hell is going on today? Why aren't even the cooks showing up? Now that the shaman is dead, are they not even bothering to put on an act anymore? Liu Renfeng, having lost a full night's sleep and currently starving, grumbled irritably. He walked to the main doors of the dining hall, scanned the distant road to confirm no one was coming, and seemingly losing all his patience, marched directly into the kitchen himself. A short while later, Liu Renfeng walked out carrying a chaotic mishmash of random ingredients. "Hey, this is all that's left in the kitchen. Just make do with it." As he spoke, Liu Renfeng let out a loud burp. It smelled distinctly sour. Catching the judgmental stares of the group, Liu Renfeng coughed awkwardly, his face turning red. I only ate one salted egg. It took me forever to dig it out." No one blamed him. After all, if it weren't for Liu Renfeng, they wouldn't even have this meager breakfast. After wolfing down the food, the group gathered their gear and headed toward the residential area. The weather today was awful. It was already incredibly gloomy, and as they entered the dense forest, a loud crack of thunder echoed overhead, followed by a steady drizzle. Pitter-patter! The rain drumming against the forest canopy created a dense, oppressive noise that further amplified their unease. They pushed through the thick, overgrown bushes. But when they finally reached the village gates, the horrifying scene unfolding inside left them absolutely paralyzed with shock. Standing at the village gates, the group discovered that the entire residential area was engulfed in a torrential downpour. The heavy rain cascaded from the sky, seemingly intent on drowning the entire village. What was even more terrifying was that both the vivid crimson color and the overpowering metallic stench proved that the rain falling upon the village was blood. Holy shit! Liu Renfeng finally couldn't hold it in anymore, letting out a vicious curse in his local dialect. Although the others didn't understand the specific dialect, they easily grasped the sentiment. I don't want to go in. At this moment, the already high-strung Zhang Feng took one look at the village drowning in a storm of blood and began to tremble violently. She squeezed her legs tightly together, desperately trying not to wet herself. Seeing this apocalyptic scene, everyone's faces turned deathly pale. The kind-hearted bled dry, turning into a drought-ending rain. At this exact moment, every single one of them remembered the cryptic clue provided by the Crimson Door before they entered. Is Guangxu currently inside the village? At the mention of that name, it wasn't just the bespectacled man and Zhongfang. Even Liu Renfeng couldn't suppress a violent shudder. Clearly, the horrors they had witnessed the previous day had left a massive psychological shadow on them. Brother, you have to realize, if that monstrosity is in there, us walking in is no different from sheep voluntarily walking into a tiger's mouth. Ning Chushui didn't answer immediately. Looking into the village, practically every visible corner was stained a terrifying, suffocating crimson. It was blatantly obvious that Guangxu had descended upon the village. But if Guangxu was already here, why was the blood rain still falling? If Guangxu hadn't left, wouldn't entering the village be pure suicide? In that brief moment, countless conflicting thoughts raced through his mind. Ning Chushui took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He pulled out the eyeballs the flayed wraith had given him and placed them flat on his palm.
Roll! Roll!
The eyeballs rolled erratically across his palm for a few seconds before finally locking their gaze onto a specific direction deep within the village. Watching this, no one uttered a single word. All of us going in together might be too risky. Ning Chushui pondered for a moment before speaking. How about this? I'll go in first to scout. If I haven't returned in 2 hours, you guys figure out another way. Hearing Ning Chushui volunteer, the way everyone looked at him subtly changed. Especially Feng. Her gaze practically morphed into that of a fanatic worshiper. Brother Ning, you're incredible. You're actually daring to walk into this nightmare alone? Are you not afraid of dying? At this moment, Feng's heart wasn't just filled with profound admiration, but also a sliver of deep envy. If she possessed even a fraction of his courage, she wouldn't have to live in such suffocating terror, completely unable to get a single good night's sleep ever since stepping through this door. A flash of genuine surprise also flickered in Bai Xiaoxiao's eyes. She already knew Ning Chushui possessed exceptional psychological fortitude, but only now did she realize she had still underestimated this rookie. She even began to legitimately question whether Ning Chushui was a normal human being. Recalling her own first time entering a crimson door, where she was so terrified she had wet her bed, Bai Xiaoxiao couldn't help but sigh internally. Comparing people will only piss you off. She had to survive numerous life and death encounters to finally overcome her phasmophobia. Yet this guy, Ning Chushui, was simply born with nerves of solid steel. Going in alone is still far too dangerous. I'm going with you. Liu Renfeng stepped up as usual. First, he trusted Ning Chushui's capabilities and instincts implicitly. Second, he genuinely couldn't sit back and let Ning Chushui face the danger alone. I'll go with you two as well, Bai Xiaoxiao said after a moment of consideration. Up until now, we haven't found any other actionable clues. I am absolutely certain that the eyes the flayed wraith gave you are incredibly crucial. The location they are pointing to must contain something of immense value. Even if it isn't the benevolent monk's skull, it will undoubtedly aid our survival. This village is currently on the absolute brink of an apocalyptic haunting. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Instead of standing out here waiting to die, we might as well bet it all on this. Having one more pair of eyes searching is definitely faster than going alone. After hearing Bai Xiaoxiao's reasoning, the bespectacled man and Feng hesitated for a long moment before finally deciding to follow them into the blood-soaked village. Bleh. The metallic stench of fresh blood was so overwhelmingly thick that the moment the latter two stepped across the village threshold, they nearly vomited. It took them a long time to barely acclimate to the nauseating odor. Ning Chushui continued to hold the eyeballs flat on his palm. Interestingly, although the group didn't have umbrellas, thanks to the flayed wraith's eyes, an invisible, vacuum-like barrier formed around them, completely isolating them from the torrential blood rain. Although this safe zone wasn't massive, it was just large enough to cover the entire group. The situation is much better than I expected. Bai Xiaoxiao smiled. While she could mentally tolerate being drenched in a downpour of blood if survival demanded it, that didn't mean she actually wanted to experience it. In most cases, women preferred to stay clean more than men did. The group advanced deeper into the village, their eyes constantly sweeping their terrifying surroundings. The sky outside the village wasn't particularly dark, but the sunlight seemed entirely incapable of piercing the village's perimeter. Everyone who stepped inside felt as if the entire world had been plunged into a gloomy, oppressive twilight. As they ventured further down the main road, Liu Renfeng suddenly spotted something. He pointed a trembling finger into the distance, his voice laced with absolute terror. "Look!" Everyone followed the direction of his finger and instantly held their breath. They had never witnessed such a bizarre, horrifying spectacle. Through the torrential curtain of blood rain, lining both sides of the dirt road, hanging from the eaves of every single house, were several pulverized, mangled corpses. These corpses looked as if they had been brutally torn apart and pulverized by a variety of heavy farming tools. Bright crimson muscle tissue was exposed, intestines spilled out and hung sickeningly from their abdomens, and shattered white bones jutted through their mangled flesh. But the most horrific detail was that every single one of these mangled corpses strung up from the eaves wore an impossibly exaggerated, bizarre smile on their pale, blood-drained faces, and their dead eyes were locked dead onto the group of outsiders who had just entered the village. It was as if they were silently welcoming their esteemed guests to the village. Ah! Zong Feng, the most timid among them, couldn't withstand the collective horrifying gaze of the hanging corpses. She let out a piercing shriek, grabbed her head with both hands, and dropped into a terrified crouch on the muddy ground. Seeing this, Ning Chishui reached down and hauled her back to her feet with one hand. If you're terrified, then don't look at them, but absolutely do not crouch on the ground. If danger suddenly strikes, you won't be able to run in time. Having her arm gripped firmly by Ning Chishui gave Zong Feng a tiny sliver of reassurance, but she kept her head bowed, absolutely refusing to look ahead. She was trembling so violently that Ning Chishui felt if he let go, her legs would give out entirely. At this moment, Bai Xiaoxiao suddenly stepped forward and supported Zong Feng. "I've got her. You focus on leading the way." Ning Chishui nodded slightly. Following the direction indicated by the rolling eyeballs, he continued to lead the group deeper into the heart of this apocalyptic, blood-soaked nightmare. "Motherfucker, these corpses are horrifying. Thank God they aren't moving." As the group ventured deeper into the village, their initial paralyzing terror gradually subsided. This was because they quickly realized that the villagers strung up from the eaves were truly dead. They had simply been brutally butchered and deliberately displayed in this grotesque manner. After walking for about 10 minutes, Ning Chishui suddenly stopped in front of a small, long-abandoned brick house. This small house was constructed with bricks and crude cement. Cobwebs hung thick in every corner, and a heavy layer of dust blanketed the floor. It clearly hadn't been inhabited in decades. There were no mangled corpses hanging from its eaves. "This is the place," Ning Chishui stated. They stepped under the awning. To ensure their safety, Ning Chishui deliberately pulled out his blood-red jade pendant. A crimson glow emanated from it, neither glaringly bright nor exceptionally dim. As Ning Chishui swept it around the entrance, a hairline crack suddenly spiderwebbed across the surface of the jade. Ning Chishui didn't comment on it. He already knew the blood jade had a limited number of uses. Bai Xiaoxiao had warned him that every ghost artifact obtained from behind a crimson door possessed strict usage limits. Ordinary, powerful ghost artifacts typically couldn't be used more than 3 times. Certain special artifacts, like the blood jade, could be activated more frequently, but they still had a definitive breaking point. There are no ghosts inside. If there were, the glow of the blood jade would drastically change. Ning Chishui's voice sounded relatively calm, but internally he wasn't entirely certain, because that vengeful wraith named Guangshu was truly, apocalyptically terrifying. He couldn't entirely rule out the possibility that Guangshu possessed the ability to completely mask his aura. "Let's go in together. Everyone stay sharp." Bai Xiaoxiao took the lead, pushing the door open. Creak! With a spine-chilling screech of friction, the heavy, weathered wooden doors swung inward. A thick cloud of dust billowed into the air, accompanied by the frantic squeaking of rats. Disturbed by the sudden intrusion, the rodents scattered into the shadows, disappearing into the dark corners of the room. This small house was significantly larger than the ordinary thatched cottages of the other villagers. In a place as impoverished as Chiyu village, whoever lived in a brick house like this undoubtedly held a special elevated status. In the left corner of the main hall on the first floor hung a framed, dust-covered photograph of a family of 3, a man, a woman, and a young girl. Ning Chishui had seen a portrait of this exact man in the ancient book hidden in the shaman's bedroom. It was Ruan Kaihuang's son, Ruan Xin. Ruan Xin was the shaman's father, and the pivotal catalyst that plunged Chiyu village into its current apocalyptic nightmare. It seems this is Ruan Xin's old house. The group searched the area thoroughly. Finally, they discovered a heavy wooden coffin resting inside the southern room off the main hall. They exchanged nervous glances. Gripping her wooden comb tightly, Bai Xiaoxiao stepped forward and forcefully shoved the coffin lid aside. Inside the coffin, nothing horrifying jumped out at them as they had dreaded. There was only a skeleton, clutching a perfectly intact human head. The eyes of this severed head were peacefully closed. Although its complexion was deathly pale, it radiated no sense of gloomy malevolence. Instead, it emitted an indescribable aura of absolute serenity. Furthermore, everyone immediately noticed that this head didn't have a single strand of hair. A wave of intense excitement washed over them. Bai Xiao reached down to carefully extract the head from the skeleton's bony grasp. However, the exact moment her fingers brushed against the skull, the skeleton's pale, bony hands violently snapped shut, gripping her wrists with a vice-like grip. Seeing this, the others immediately lunged forward to help, but Bai Xiao spoke up sharply. "You already ruined this village while you were alive. Isn't that enough? Look outside. Look at the apocalyptic hellscape this village has become. You committed monstrous sins in life, and now you want to continue your sins in death?" Whether Bai Xiao's harsh reprimand successfully triggered Ruan Xin's lingering guilt, or whether his skeleton merely possessed a fading wisp of obsession rather than genuine, malicious intent, the result was undeniable. The moment Bai Xiao finished speaking, the skeletal hands actually let go. The group saw two pitch-black, bruised handprints marring Bai Xiao's pale wrists. "Sister Bai, are you all right?" Liu Renfeng asked anxiously. Bai Xiao shook her head. "Let's get out of here quickly. Being in this village makes me feel incredibly uneasy." Everyone nodded in agreement. No one felt comfortable lingering in a village drowning in a torrential downpour of blood. But just as they stepped out of the house, a piercing, agonizing shriek tore from Zongfang's throat. They saw Zongfang, who had stepped out first, get completely drenched by the blood rain pouring from the sky. She frantically scrambled backward under the awning, wrapping her arms tightly around herself, dropping to a crouch and sobbing uncontrollably, as if she only had minutes left to live. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, Ning Qushui quickly pulled out the eyeballs the flayed wraith had given him. But the moment he placed them on his palm, the entire group watched in horror as the wraith's eyes rapidly dissolved into a puddle of clear water at a speed visible to the naked eye. What just happened? Li Renfeng gasped in shock. They had been entirely reliant on those eyes to safely navigate the blood rain. Now that the wraith's eyes had vanished, didn't that mean they were all going to be drenched by this horrifying, cursed storm? No one wanted to be soaked in that bizarre blood rain. "Search the house. See if there are any umbrellas." Ning Qushui was the first to react. He had already begun to feel a suffocating sense of impending doom. He couldn't articulate exactly what was wrong, but the feeling was overwhelmingly oppressive, as if an apocalyptic terror was rapidly descending upon them, screaming at his instincts to flee this place immediately. The group frantically scoured the house, but found absolutely no umbrellas. "Motherfucker, how can a house not have a single umbrella?" Sigh. This is Chi Village, praying for Rain Village. Just hearing the name tells you how desperate these villagers were for rain. It makes twisted sense that they wouldn't prepare umbrellas. The bespectacled man offered a bleak, pale smile. Left with absolutely no other choice, the group was forced to plunge directly into the blood rain. They all knew the village was lethal. Every extra minute they lingered exponentially increased their chances of dying. The blood rain poured relentlessly. The instant they stepped into the thick, metallic downpour, a freezing, bone-deep chill violently pierced their bodies. They finally understood why Zongfang had reacted so hysterically. Not daring to delay for a single second, they sprinted wildly toward the village gates, completely ignoring the torrential blood rain hammering against their heads. The five of them left the house and headed back toward the village gates, with Ning Qushui taking the lead. He deliberately tried not to run too fast. Ning Qushui knew that this apocalyptic blood rain was exerting immense psychological pressure on the group. Under such crushing stress, if the leader panicked and bolted, it would only amplify everyone else's terror, potentially triggering an uncontrollable, chaotic stampede. As the leader, he had to strictly control his pace, moving swiftly, but never frantically. Without the flayed wraith's eyes to shield them from the downpour, everyone was forced to shield their eyes with their hands, desperately trying to wipe away the viscous blood blinding them so they could see the path ahead. As they sprinted onto the village's main dirt road, Liu Renfeng suddenly let out a bizarre, strangled yelp. Ah! Following his terrified cry, the rest of the group quickly spotted the horrifying anomaly in the village. The mangled corpses hanging from the eaves of the houses, which had originally been facing the village entrance, had at some unknown point rotated completely around. Now, with those vacant, grotesque smiles plastered on their faces, every single corpse was staring dead at the five of them running down the street. This apocalyptic scene became the final straw that completely broke Zhang Feng. She let out a piercing, agonizing shriek, grabbed her head, and blindly bolted in a random direction. The blood rain was far too heavy, accompanied by a hazy crimson mist that severely obscured their vision. Ning Chushui could only rely on his memory to navigate toward the village gates. When Zhang Feng broke down, Ning Chushui had desperately tried to grab her, but he missed. Bai Xiaoxiao couldn't catch her, and neither could he. "Zhang Feng!" the bespectacled man roared, preparing to chase after her, but Liu Renfeng violently grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Calm down. We can barely save ourselves right now. We absolutely do not have the capability to save her. Get to the village gates first! Hurry!" Being restrained by Liu Renfeng made the bespectacled man feel incredibly conflicted. Although he hadn't known Zhang Feng prior to this crimson door, they had formed a team over the past few days, and she had left a good impression on him. He desperately wanted to save this timid but sensible girl. He didn't want her to die in this nightmare. However, unexpected tragedies always strike suddenly. They had nearly made it to the edge of the village when the young Zhang Feng tumbled into the pitch-black darkness behind them. She hadn't run far before a blood-curdling scream tore through the air. The group couldn't see exactly what had happened to her. They only caught a terrifying, blurry silhouette materializing through the thick curtain of blood rain. They all knew exactly what that black silhouette was. It was Guangxiu. "Run!" Ning Chushui roared, locking onto the direction of the village gates and sprinting. The rest of the group followed closely behind. They ran for their lives, yet they couldn't seem to shake off the apocalyptic silhouette behind them. Guangxiu didn't appear to be moving, yet within the torrential blood rain, his terrifying shadow was drawing closer and closer to the group. "This isn't right!" Bai Xiaoxiao suddenly screamed. "Stop!" Hearing her command, everyone immediately slammed on the brakes. This reaction stemmed from their absolute, implicit trust in Bai Xiaoxiao. "What's wrong, Sister Bai?" Liu Renfeng asked, frantically wiping the thick blood from his face. Bai Xiaoxiao turned around, staring dead at the horrifying silhouette rapidly closing in on them. A ruthless glint flashed in her eyes. After a split second, she gritted her teeth and issued a suicidal order. "Run straight toward him." Everyone froze in absolute shock. "Hurry!" Without another word of explanation, Bai Xiaoxiao took the lead and sprinted directly toward the apocalyptic silhouette. Ning Chushui and Liu Renfeng exchanged a quick glance. With practically zero hesitation, they bolted after her. The bespectacled man followed suit. Although his rationality was screaming at him that this was pure suicide, his profound trust in the other three compelled him to blindly obey. Just like that, the entire group sprinted desperately toward the apocalyptic wraith. As they drew closer to the silhouette, everyone felt their hearts lodge in their throats, feeling as if they might explode from their chests. They had absolutely no idea what Bai Xiaoxiao was planning or what crucial details she had noticed. They only knew one thing for certain. If Bai Xiaoxiao's judgment was wrong, every single one of them would die. Guangxu's pulverized, terrifying face materialized clearly before their eyes. He glared at them with a grotesque sneer, absolute venomous malice erupting in his bloodshot eyes. He lunged toward Bai Xiaoxiao, who was running at the very front, opening his jaw impossibly wide into a gaping, bloody maw. The horrific sight made everyone stop breathing. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" Bai Xiaoxiao roared one final time right before colliding with Guangxu. In the very next fraction of a second, her body phased directly through Guangxu, emerging completely unscathed and sprinting into the curtain of blood ahead. Seeing this impossible miracle, the rest of the group's trust solidified. They too charged headlong into Guangxu. Every single one of them phased harmlessly through Guangshu's body, desperately following Bai Xiaoxiao's lead. The apocalyptic silhouette behind them slowly turned around. He stared at their retreating backs with an expression of unfathomable hatred, yet he didn't take a single step in pursuit. "Holy shit, Sister Bai, what the hell just happened?" Liu Renfeng, forever the man of 100,000 questions, gasped. Panting heavily, Bai Xiaoxiao replied over her shoulder. Behind the crimson doors, there is a very bizarre underlying rule. This rule only applies strictly to the first 3 doors. It states that a vengeful wraith can only execute 1 person within a short time frame. Although the difficulty of this crimson door exponentially exceeds a standard second door, fundamentally, it is still a second door, meaning it must strictly adhere to this rule. Hearing this, everyone instantly understood. Zhong Fang had just been slaughtered by Guangshu. Therefore, within this short cooldown window, Guangshu was physically incapable of attacking the rest of them. Knowing full well he couldn't kill us, he still rapidly materialized and actively chased us down. The only logical explanation is, he was deliberately trying to hurt us in that specific direction. Therefore, that direction was absolutely not the exit. After Bai Xiaoxiao finished her explanation, Ning Chushui frowned deeply. If I remember correctly, that direction genuinely did lead to the village gates. Bai Xiaoxiao shook her head. "Chushui, you have excellent instincts, but you're still a bit too rigid. This is an open layout village. There are multiple paths leading out. It didn't necessarily have to be that specific route. Furthermore, didn't you notice the path we just took to escape had no blood rain falling on it?" At the mention of this crucial detail, everyone froze. They looked down at the thick, crimson blood soaking their clothes, finally realizing the horrifying truth. This blood rain is the physical manifestation of Guangshu's apocalyptic resentment. Previously, we were shielded by the flayed wraith's eyes, so we didn't get drenched. Now that the eyes have been destroyed, our entire bodies are completely covered in Guangshu's resentment. Under these conditions, if we had attempted to exit the village through that route, there were only 2 possible outcomes. First, the moment we stepped out of the blood rain, we would die instantly. Second, we would never have been able to escape the blood rain in the first place. Liu Renfeng's eyes widened in horrifying realization. "Sister Bai, are you saying this entire blood rain is actually Guangshu's ghost domain?" Bai Xiaoxiao nodded slightly. "You can interpret it that way. I secretly used a ghost artifact to verify this, which is exactly why I was able to stop you all in time." Hearing this, everyone shuddered violently, especially Ning Chushui and Liu Renfeng. They had now intimately experienced the sheer apocalyptic terror of this crimson door. Put simply, if Bai Xiaoxiao hadn't accompanied them and guided them through this crisis, it was highly likely they would have all died back there. "Then how do we get out?" the bespectacled man asked, panting heavily, addressing the most critical, lethal question. "According to what you just said, no matter what we do, we can't escape this blood rain. Doesn't that mean we're guaranteed to die?" "It's not that absolute." Bai Xiaoxiao pointed toward the blood rain in the distance. The others strained their eyes to look closely, only to horrifyingly discover that the area covered by the downpour wasn't limited to just the village. With the shaman dead, the restraints holding Guangshu back have been completely obliterated. His apocalyptic resentment has begun to rapidly expand. Wherever he roams, the blood rain will follow. We just need to follow the remaining path straight up to the mountain shrine. Liu Renfeng asked in confusion, "But aren't we supposed to find the benevolent monk's body? Just having his skull is entirely useless." Bai Xiaoxiao shook her head. "The body has already been found. Just follow me." The underlying rules of the Crimson Door won't restrict Guangshu's actions for long. We have to hurry. The group nodded. Following Bai Xiaoxiao's lead, they traced the path Guangshu had taken, charging toward the shrine located on the rear mountain. They moved incredibly fast. After all, no one knew exactly how much longer the Crimson Door's rules could stall the vengeful wraith. Right now, Guangshu was lurking somewhere within the blood rain, like a lethal guillotine suspended directly above their necks, ready to drop at any given second. When they reached the base of the mountain again, The blood cascading down the stone steps had practically formed a small, rushing stream. Every step they took was treacherous. One wrong move, and they would slip and tumble down.
Faster!
They stumbled and scrambled their way up. When they reached the halfway point, Ning Chushui glanced back down the mountain, and his heart violently seized. "Guangxu is catching up," he roared. Hearing his warning, the others looked back and saw the apocalyptic silhouette standing at the very base of the mountain, staring coldly up at them. Just a single glance was enough to send a freezing chill straight down their spines. In the very next second, the silhouette suddenly materialized on the second landing of the stone steps. It had cleared that distance in just 2 seconds. "Don't look back. Keep moving," Bai Xiaoxiao screamed. Gritting her teeth, she led the desperate charge toward the mountain peak, heading straight for the shrine that was now practically submerged in a deluge of blood. "Sister Bai, where is the body?" Liu Renfeng yelled in absolute panic as he watched Guangxu inexplicably materialize right at the entrance of the shrine, completely blocking their only exit. Yet at this apocalyptic moment, Bai Xiaoxiao showed absolutely no fear. Conversely, she seemed to let out a profound sigh of relief. A faint smile graced her deathly pale face. "The monk's body, hasn't it been following us this entire time?" The 3 men froze, utterly bewildered by her words. Then, to their absolute shock, she pulled the skull from beneath her coat and handed it directly to the bespectacled man. "Haven't you been searching for your head this entire time? Now we have finally helped you find it." The bespectacled man looked down at the skull resting in his hands for a long time. The terror and confusion in his eyes gradually faded, replaced by profound clarity. "I remember now." He smiled softly. "Thank you, everyone." As soon as the words left his mouth, the bespectacled man's body suddenly blurred right in front of their eyes. When his form stabilized, he had transformed into the headless corpse of a Buddhist monk. None of the 3 were strangers to this headless monk, because just a few days ago, they had witnessed this exact entity fishing severed heads out of the dry well with their own eyes. However, neither Ning Jushui nor Liu Renfeng could have ever imagined that this monk had actually seamlessly replaced one of their own members, hiding perfectly among them. Liu Renfeng's jaw dropped. He stared at the monk before him, his throat completely tight, unable to utter a single syllable. The monk slowly lifted the skull and placed it onto his severed neck. After twisting it a few times, the skull seemed to lock firmly in place. Pressing his palms together, the monk looked at the 3 of them with an expression of absolute, transcendent serenity and offered a deep bow. "This humble monk thanks the benefactors for helping me recover my skull. As for what comes next, please leave it to this humble monk." With that, the monk turned around and walked slowly, step by step, toward Guangxu, standing at the shrine's entrance. Guangxu, whose entire body was radiating an apocalyptic aura of resentment, showed a flicker of hesitation and confusion in his bloodshot eyes upon seeing the monk. The monk extended a hand and gently pressed it against Guangxu's forehead. "Every grievance has its source, every debt its debtor. Benefactor Guang. Those who deserve to die, you have slaughtered. Those who did not deserve to die, you have also slaughtered. Even now, can you truly not let go of this hatred?" Guangxu's gaze lost its previous chaotic madness, becoming significantly more lucid, yet the underlying fury still burned fiercely. He violently shot his hand forward, locking it in a death grip around the monk's wrist. However, the monk, seemingly protected by the profound power of Buddhist scriptures, showed absolutely no fear of Guangxu. The 2 powerful entities locked into a tense stalemate. Right at that critical moment, Ning Chushui suddenly spoke up. "Guangxu, do you remember when we first entered the village? None of us were touched by the blood rain back then. Do you remember? Do you know why? Because at that time, we were carrying the eyes of your wife, Zhou Nanyu." Guangxu stiffened upon hearing this. His bloodshot eyes, brimming with hatred, locked fiercely onto Ning Chushui. But Ning Chushui didn't stop. He continued his desperate gamble. "This monk's skull was found with the direct help of your wife, Zhou Nanyu. It isn't that we want you to let go of this hatred. It is your wife, Zhou Nanyu, who no longer wants to see you continuously tortured and consumed by this endless resentment. She is tired, and she feels that You must be tired too." Hearing Ning Shui's words, Guangxu violently grabbed his own head and let out an agonizing, heaven-shattering wail. Precisely at that moment, a woman in a red dress materialized through the torrential downpour outside the shrine. She drifted silently through the air, cradling a horrifyingly charred child that only had half its body remaining. The two ghostly figures stood quietly in the blood rain, gazing silently at Guangxu. The monk gently withdrew his hand. Guangxu slowly turned his head. He stared deeply into the torrential blood rain for a very long time, until the thick crimson downpour finally began to fade, slowly transitioning back into a normal, crystal-clear rainstorm. Suddenly, a voice, the exhausted, desolate voice of an ordinary middle-aged man, escaped Guangxu's lips. "The rain we prayed for, we have waited for it for so very long." The monk pressed his palms together and chanted a Buddhist mantra. "Indeed, but perhaps your wife and child have also waited for you for a very long time." Guangxu let out a long, heavy sigh. He stood up straight, turned his back on the shrine, and walked out. He walked step by step toward his wife and child, wrapping his arms tightly around them both. Then the three spirits slowly faded away, disappearing entirely into the cleansing rain. Witnessing this miraculous resolution, the three survivors inside the shrine finally let out massive, shuddering sighs of relief and collapsed heavily onto the floor. They had survived. "Great Master, thank you." They offered their profound, heartfelt gratitude to the monk standing before them. If it hadn't been for this monk, they would have undoubtedly died today. The monk shook his head, a gentle smile gracing his face. "If I do not descend into hell, who will? The lingering obsessions here have been fulfilled. There is no more resentment tying me to this realm. It is time for me to depart as well." As soon as he finished speaking, the skull resting on the monk's neck tumbled to the ground. In the very next second, both the skull and the monk's body rapidly decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye, eventually crumbling entirely into dust and mud. A cool, refreshing breeze blew in from outside the shrine. It felt incredibly soothing. Ning Shui finally regained his composure. Dragging his exhausted body out of the shrine, he tilted his head back, letting the clean, pure rainwater wash over his face. Then, mouthful by mouthful, he greedily drank the cool, life-giving rain. Without vengeful spirits harassing them, the three returned to the hostel under a cool, refreshing rain. Although only 5 days had passed, it felt as if they had lived through an entire lifetime. They vaguely remembered that when they first arrived, 11 companions had stood in the clearing outside the hostel. In just 5 short days, only the 3 of them remained. The others who had stepped through the crimson door from the outside world had all died in this village. This sense of emptiness and absolute silence made the 3 feel somewhat unaccustomed. Sigh. Liu Chengfeng let out a heavy sigh, his gaze complex. A trace of guilt lingered in his heart. Liu Chengfeng couldn't help but feel that these people entering this specific crimson door was somehow connected to them. Blame their bad luck. Don't overthink it. Seemingly guessing what Liu Chengfeng was thinking, Bai Xiaoxiao offered a word of comfort. Liu Chengfeng nodded slightly. "Right, Sister Bai. How did you know the bespectacled man was the monk?" Bai Xiaoxiao shrugged. "Do you remember what you encountered on our first day here?" Liu Chengfeng thought back for a moment. It felt like ages ago. After all, they had been through so much that minor details were easily overlooked. After a moment of recollection, Liu Chengfeng finally remembered that when he first stepped through this crimson door, he had spawned at the base of the rear mountain. At that time, he had seen with his own eyes a headless person mixed within the crowd of players. Realization dawned on Liu Chengfeng. The 3 of us definitely weren't the benevolent, and the actual benevolent was someone already dead who couldn't die again. Therefore, those who were killed during the task couldn't have been the benevolent. The answer was obvious. Speaking of this, Bai Xiaoxiao sighed. It's a pity that girl couldn't withstand the pressure. She was just 1 step away from leaving this door. Ning Shui and Liu Chengfeng didn't reply. Naturally, they also felt pity for the girl named Feng. Someone who had desperately tried to survive, actively searched for clues, and never dragged her teammates down. Someone who was on the verge of successfully escaping the Crimson Door, ultimately failed at the very last step. This tragedy served as a brutal reminder to the two men of the sheer cruelty of the world behind the crimson doors. Over the next 2 days, aside from having relatively little to eat, they rested very comfortably. The feeling of absolute safety in this hellish ghost world was almost intoxicating. During that time, Liu Feng even proactively ran back into the corpse-filled village to scavenge for food. Of course, aside from a few rotten potatoes, he found absolutely nothing. At midnight on the 7th day, a bright moon hung high in the night sky. At that exact moment, a dilapidated old-fashioned bus appeared out of nowhere in front of their hostel. The three, who had been sleeping in the reception room, were highly alert. They quickly dressed, grabbed their belongings, went outside and boarded the bus without hesitation. A thick, heavy mist had already materialized around the area. After the bus slowly drove into the dense fog, the mist covering the village rapidly dissipated. However, the dilapidated bus was long gone, as if it had never been there at all. The bus rolled to a stop at the gates of the ghost dwelling. The moment the three stepped off, they were greeted by the adorable, smiling face of a teenager. It was Tianxun. Seeing that the three had returned safely, Mengjun, who had been leaning against the gates of the ghost dwelling, turned and walked back inside without a word. Tianjun's face, however, was brimming with excitement. "Awesome! I can't believe you guys actually made it back." He was genuinely thrilled, his small face flushed red. Looking fair and chubby, he was quite adorable. Tianxun stepped forward and hugged Bai Xiaoxiao. Standing to the side, Ning Chushui curiously asked Tianxun, "How did you know we were back?" Tianxun shrugged. The flow of time behind a crimson door and here in the mist-shrouded world isn't the same. No matter how long you stay in there, you will always return to the ghost dwelling at exactly midnight on the night you entered the crimson door. Of course, the prerequisite is that you actually make it back alive. Ning Chushui suddenly understood. Returning to this gloomy, dimly lit villa, Ning Chushui and Liu Feng felt a long-lost sense of warmth. Liang Yan, dressed in his suit, was still warming himself by the charcoal stove. "It's truly rare," he said, "for rookies like you to actually survive such a high-difficulty crimson door." Liang Yan's eyes held genuine praise. Meanwhile, Tianxun, peeling a banana, pouted and mumbled, "Isn't it just because my sister Bai went in to carry them?" For an entity to create a spirit realm capable of overriding the underlying rules, it's terrifying just thinking about it. Bai Xiaoxiao shook her head. "Don't say that. I nearly died in there too. Fortunately, the two of them risked their lives to save me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it back." Hearing this, the expressions of everyone in the room drastically changed. Was that crimson door really that lethal? Bai Xiaoxiao nodded slightly. Yes, the most terrifying danger didn't actually stem from the ghosts there. In that world, it wasn't just the ghosts that wanted to kill people. The humans wanted to kill too. She detailed everything they had experienced behind the crimson door. Everyone was horrified, especially when Bai Xiaoxiao recounted facing off against the shaman alone in the dead of night. It made the listeners break out in cold sweat. Tianxun, who was about to eat his banana, had his eyes wide and jaw dropped. Utterly engrossed in Bai Xiaoxiao's story, he completely forgot to eat the peeled banana in his hand. It wasn't until Bai Xiaoxiao finished that he swallowed hard, looking at Ning Chushui and Liu Feng with absolute shock. The teenager realized that these two, whom he had always looked down upon, were actually quite formidable. Especially Ning Chushui. In Bai Xiaoxiao's recounting, he was incredibly courageous, highly meticulous, and completely unflappable. Someone like that, even among veterans who had braved the Crimson Doors numerous times, was a top-tier existence. "Holy shit, Chushui! You are amazing! What did you do before this? Were you a cop? A hitman?" Seeing everyone's eyes fixed on him, Ning Chushui shrugged. "A veterinarian," he said. Of course, whether anyone actually believed him was entirely up to them. "Good. It's good that you're back." After chatting for a while, Liang Yan stood up, seemingly ready to turn in for the night. "In 1 week, your third Crimson Door will open. The difficulty of this door will be significantly lower than your second one, but you still cannot underestimate it. I know countless examples of people who failed within their first 3 doors. Therefore, even when relaxing, you must remain vigilant." Once you survive these 3 doors, you will have 6 full months to comprehensively understand the mist-shrouded world and the crimson doors, and to properly prepare for the 4th door. By then, you will have much more time. Ning Qiushui and Lu Chengfeng nodded slightly, indicating they understood, and internally breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Oh, right. Liang Yan, who was about to head upstairs, suddenly called out to Bai Xiao. She had been staring blankly at the charcoal stove and looked up. "What is it, Uncle Yan?" Liang Yan replied, "The day after tomorrow, there is a highly special task. You will accompany me into the Crimson Door." Bai Xiao nodded slightly in tacit understanding, saying nothing more. With that, the group returned to their respective rooms to rest. After washing up, Ning Qiushui was just about to get into bed to sleep when he suddenly felt something in his pocket. He reached inside and felt around, unexpectedly pulling out a book. Ning Qiushui recalled that this book had been found hidden in a secret compartment beneath the shaman's bed. If ordinary objects cannot be brought out of the Crimson Doors, doesn't this mean this book is actually a ghost artifact? His eyes lit up. During their previous Crimson Door, Ning Qiushui had intimately experienced the sheer power of ghost artifacts. A person with a ghost artifact and a person without one had completely different survival rates behind the Crimson Doors. If the 3 of them hadn't possessed ghost artifacts during that apocalyptic task, they would have died countless times over. Their next Crimson Door would open in exactly 1 week. If Ning Qiushui could secure an additional ghost artifact, his chances of survival would skyrocket. After flipping through it for a while, Ning Qiushui stowed the book away. He didn't know what its specific function was yet. He could only test it out later. The night passed peacefully. The next morning, Lu Chengfeng woke up early to cook breakfast for everyone. It had to be said, his culinary skills were exceptional. Given a proper kitchen and sufficient ingredients, just a simple bowl of potato soup and minced meat porridge completely conquered Tianxin's stomach. The teenager wolfed down 3 massive bowls, let out a loud burp, and collapsed onto the sofa. Rubbing his round, full belly, he squinted comfortably. "Beardy, your cooking is incredible. Are you a multi-star chef or something? Do you work at a Michelin restaurant?" Lu Chengfeng, yawning while eating his own porridge, chuckled. "Me? Nah, I'm not a chef. You guys are just lucky to be enjoying this. If we were outside, I wouldn't have the time to cook like this." Hearing this, Tianxin tilted his head curiously. "Then what do you do outside, Beardy?" Lu Chengfeng put on the air of a profound, enlightened master. "I read fortunes." Hearing this, everyone exchanged bizarre looks. Tianxin held it in for a long moment before clutching his stomach and bursting into laughter. "Ha!" Lu Chengfeng didn't understand what was so funny. He looked at the only person calmly eating his meal and asked, "What's wrong? Do I not look like a fortune teller?" Ning Qiushui raised an eyebrow and smiled. "I think they're laughing because it's hard to believe there are still people running scams like that in this day and age." Tianxin chimed in. "Exactly. Beardy, what era do you think this is? Who still reads fortunes?" Lu Chengfeng glared at him. Shoo, go play somewhere else. What does a kid know?" "What do you mean fortune teller? That sounds terrible. I am an inheritor of traditional culture." Tianxin giggled smugly. Perhaps because he felt these 2 wouldn't die so easily anymore, he had completely dropped his previously cold, detached attitude, becoming much more vibrant and talkative. "Beardy, let me ask you, how much do you even make in a month reading fortunes?" Lu Chengfeng thought for a moment. "Usually a couple of thousand, sometimes just a few hundred if business is slow." Hearing this, Tianxin couldn't help but laugh again. "No way. Beardy, with your culinary skills, if you worked as a chef, you could easily make tens of thousands a month, right? Why on earth would you choose to be a fortune teller?" Lu Chengfeng shook his head. This time, he didn't bicker with the teenager. He simply replied with a soft, genuine tone, "Probably because reading fortunes offers more freedom." Naturally, no one believed this excuse, but since Lu Chengfeng didn't elaborate, they didn't press the issue. This was the basic respect required when dealing with others in the mist-shrouded world. Almost everyone here harbored their own deep secrets. If it was a secret, they naturally wouldn't easily share it. However, Ning Qiushui mentally noted this detail about Lu Chengfeng. Tianxin was right. With Liu Chengfeng's skills, if he simply opened a small restaurant and endured the difficult first month or two, he could easily pull in tens of thousands a month. This wasn't an exaggeration, nor was it a joke. Liu Chengfeng genuinely possessed that capability. Yet he chose to abandon such a lucrative, stable income to be a destitute fortune teller. His true motive was definitely worth pondering. After breakfast, Liang Yan left early. He seemed to always be busy. Watching Liang Yan's retreating back, Ning Chishui curiously asked Tianshun, who was playing with a Rubik's Cube on the sofa, "Tianshun, what is Uncle Yan usually so busy with?" Tianshun answered without looking up, "Looking for puzzle pieces." Ning Chishui froze, then heard Tianshun continue, "Uncle Yan is incredible. Our ghost dwelling has a total of 6 puzzle pieces, and he personally secured half of them." Tianshun's voice was filled with profound admiration and gratitude. Ning Chishui thought for a moment. Has Uncle Yan reached his 7th crimson door already? Tianshun shook his head, the deep admiration in his eyes intensifying. His 9th door. Ning Chishui was stunned. His 9th door? Tianshun nodded. Uncle Yan only has half a year left before his 9th crimson door opens. After seeing the cryptic clue for his 9th door, he deduced that he is absolutely guaranteed to die inside it. Therefore, he has been frantically taking on external tasks, desperately trying to collect the remaining puzzle pieces before his time runs out. Ning Chishui understood perfectly. If I were in his shoes, I would do the exact same thing. After a long silence, Tianshun suddenly spoke in a low, somber voice. "You don't understand. Even though Uncle Yan never says it out loud, we all actually know. He's worried about us. Uncle Yan has never feared death, nor does he have any intention of trying to skip or avoid his 9th door. Those puzzle pieces, he's acquiring them for us. But everyone knows in their hearts that collecting the puzzle pieces is probably just a false hope. After all, we've only ever heard rumors about veterans who supposedly collected the pieces. In reality, no one has ever seen a ghost dwelling with a complete jigsaw puzzle." Ning Chishui looked up, staring intently at the incomplete jigsaw puzzle mounted on the wall. He asked casually, "Is it really that difficult to collect them?" Tianjin sighed, introducing Ning Chishui to a brand new, brutal rule regarding the puzzle pieces. It's incredibly difficult, because people are always dying. If you manage to collect 2 puzzle pieces, but you die during a task, the 2 pieces belonging to you will permanently vanish from the ghost dwelling. The others will have to find them all over again. Furthermore, the life-threatening puzzle pieces only have a roughly 10% chance of spawning behind the 4th through 6th doors. And that's just the spawn rate. In reality, even if a piece spawns, the person surviving that door isn't guaranteed to be able to secure it. You can imagine, inside a high-difficulty crimson door, not only do you have to guard against apocalyptic ghosts, desperately try to survive, and complete the door's mandatory tasks, but you also have to guard against the other chosen people who entered the door with you. Tianshun didn't continue, but through his grim description, Ning Chishui could vividly picture the nightmare. He viscerally understood the sheer, brutal difficulty of collecting the puzzle pieces. Too many wolves, not enough meat. Behind every single puzzle piece, there was undoubtedly a vicious, blood-soaked struggle. Ning Chishui fell silent for a moment. Suddenly recalling a previous conversation, he asked softly, "Did Uncle Yan's friend also die because of a puzzle piece?" At the mention of Uncle Mang, Tianshun shook his head. "I don't know. They never told me. They probably felt I was too young and didn't want to drag me into their vicious struggles." Ning Chishui nodded in understanding. He reached out and gently ruffled Tianshun's hair. "I won't be eating lunch here. I have some business outside. I'm heading back first. Let the others know for me." Tianshun replied with an okay. After saying his goodbyes, Ning Chishui walked out the gates of the villa, boarded the dilapidated bus, and departed the mist-shrouded world. Returning to his apartment, Ning Chishui tidied up a bit, carefully wiped down his parents' portrait, and placed it back in its original position. After taking a shower, he sat at his desk, booted up his computer, and checked the messages from Hamster. Coffin. I couldn't dig up any information regarding that letter from the post office. However, I did contact a very special friend, Kaku. She seems to have found a lead. Whenever you're free, I can arrange for the 2 of you to meet. Reading the messages, Ning Chushui felt a surge of restlessness. He was constantly haunted by those two cryptic letters, feeling as if someone was continuously watching him from the shadows. He desperately wanted to unmask the sender and uncover their true motives. Therefore, he replied to Hamster, "I'm free all week." Ning Chushui frowned slightly when he saw the alias Cuckoo. He had heard this name before. Both Hamster and Washing Machine had previously mentioned a woman operating under the name Cuckoo. Due to the highly sensitive nature of his work, Ning Chushui didn't have many friends. However, every single friend he did have was an absolute elite in their respective fields. Washing Machine was another one of Ning Chushui's contacts, but they didn't communicate frequently. Worked for the military. Aside from occasionally helping Ning Chushui resolve complex personal issues, his primary duties involved highly classified operations, leaving little opportunity for casual contact. Ning Chushui also knew that ordinary people had absolutely zero chance of ever associating with someone like Washing Machine. So, what exactly made this woman named Cuckoo so special that she could be friends with someone like Washing Machine? Hamster quickly replied, arranging for Ning Chushui to meet Cuckoo the following day at an old cafe named Liangmu Yuan. The next day, Ning Chushui arrived at the designated location. Shortly after, he saw a slender woman with an elegant figure walking toward him in high heels. She wore dark sunglasses, exuding an indescribable aura of icy detachment. Unlike Bai Xiao, although this woman was stunningly beautiful, she emanated an unapproachable, dangerous vibe. She quickly identified Ning Chushui and sat down directly across from him. "Are you Coffin?" the woman asked. Ning Chushui frowned slightly, but quickly relaxed his expression. "I prefer people call me Veterinarian," chuckled softly. "Veterinarian? If I didn't already know what you've done, I might actually believe that." Ning Chushui smiled but didn't respond, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Have you tracked down where this letter was sent from?" Shook her head. "No, but I do have another piece of information, one I guarantee you'll find incredibly interesting." Ning Chushui raised an eyebrow. "Another interesting piece of information. Let's hear it." Cuckoo unhurriedly pulled out a slender cigarette and placed it between her lips. She lightly tapped her long leg against the floor, and the door to their private booth slid shut. Then she lit the cigarette, exhaled a plume of thin smoke, and looked directly at Ning Chushui. "First of all, I'm not here today just to provide you a service. I'm here to make a trade." Ning Chushui nodded slightly, getting straight to the point. "What do you want?" Looked Ning Chushui up and down before finally speaking. "Help me bury Wolfhead." "What did he do?" Ning Chushui asked. Replied calmly, "He crossed the line. He killed someone." With that, she pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table to Ning Chushui. The man in the photo was exceptionally handsome. "Who did he kill?" Hui asked. Remained perfectly calm as she delivered a sentence that genuinely shocked Ning Chushui. "He killed me." "What do you mean? Tonight? You're not gonna hide?" "No." As Cuckoo finished speaking, a pale, morbid smile surfaced on her face. "Tonight, after I'm dead, I want you to kill him." Ning Chushui pocketed the photograph. "What if you don't die?" Fell silent for a long moment. "I am absolutely guaranteed to die, and I will die horribly. He knows every single method to torture me. But tonight, before I am completely dead, you are not allowed to enter the room." Ning Chushui let out a heavy sigh. "All right. So, what information did you want to tell me?" Didn't speak immediately, seemingly organizing her thoughts. A moment later, she said, "Actually, you aren't the only one who received a cryptic letter." Ning Chushui suddenly snapped his head up, an indescribable emotion flashing in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Replied, "Exactly what I said." With that, she crushed her cigarette out in the ashtray, stood up, and prepared to leave. When she reached the door, paused. "There is another person who, exactly like you, received a cryptic letter. The origin cannot be traced, and there is absolutely no signature. The post office has zero records of it being processed. The letter simply appeared. About a week ago, that person tracked me down and hired me to investigate." Ning Chushui frowned. "Male or female?" Ignored Ning Chushui's question, simply stating, "That person goes by the alias Red Bean. We only communicated 3 times. I conducted a preliminary investigation but found absolutely nothing useful. If you're interested, tonight, after I'm dead, you can take my laptop and look for clues yourself." With that, Cuckoo swayed her slender figure and walked out the door. Ning Shui sat alone in the private room, staring at his half-finished coffee, sinking into a deep silence. Night fell. Ning Shui changed into a set of black tactical clothing, packed his tools, and left his apartment. Arriving in the Jiangning district, he followed Cuckoo's instructions, entered the 11-story residential building, took the elevator up to the 27th floor, and stopped in front of apartment 2704. The hallway was deathly silent. Ning Shui pulled out a stethoscope and pressed it against the heavy door. Through the earpieces, he instantly heard the agonizing screams of a woman and the vicious curses of a man.
You fucking bitch! Die!
The soundproofing of this apartment was exceptional. Without the stethoscope, anyone standing outside wouldn't hear a single sound. Haha, Gaopan, you can rest assured. The money my parents left me, I won't give you a single cent. You bitch, you fucking bitch. I loved you so much, why are you treating me like this? Loved me, you degenerate gambler, you loved my money. I pity my past self for being so blind and stupid, actually falling for your sweet lies. Cough, cough. The woman began to cough violently. Then, the sickening thud of a blunt object repeatedly striking flesh echoed through the door, and the woman's screams ceased entirely. About half a minute later, Ning Shui heard the man muttering in a low, trembling voice. "If you don't give me the money, they're gonna kill me. You're the one killing me. I just took my revenge first. You, wake up. Wake up. Ha, you're dead? Good. When? I am your legal husband. Now that you're dead, all your money is mine." The man laughed maniacally for a long time, only to suddenly realize that the front door to his apartment had swung open. A man dressed in black tactical gear, wearing a face mask that only revealed a pair of freezing, murderous eyes, was standing silently in the doorway. The scene inside the apartment was indescribably horrific. The originally luxuriously decorated living room was now flooded with a terrifying, gruesome crimson. It was Ku's blood. Ning Shui saw Cuckoo tied tightly to a chair in the middle of the living room, completely naked. Her head was tilted all the way back, her eyes staring blankly into the void. Her skull looked as if it had been sawed open by a chainsaw, and her brain had been mashed into a pulp by a heavy object, spilling all over the floor. Her body was covered in a dense array of sickening wounds, yet a bizarre smile hung on Cuckoo's lips. It was a grotesque, incomprehensible smile, as if mocking the man before her, while simultaneously mocking herself. Looking at that smile, Ning Shui suddenly understood. This woman had loved the man before her passionately, to the point of madness, but she had also hated him to the bone. Unable to be with him, yet unable to leave him, she had chosen to destroy everything. Witnessing Ning Shui's sudden appearance, Gao Pan, after a brief moment of shock, flashed a vicious, murderous glint in his eyes. He absolutely could not let Ning Shui leave this room alive. Watching Gao Pan advancing step by step with a revving mini chainsaw, Ning Shui unexpectedly turned around and slowly pulled the apartment door shut. This calm action made Gao Pan freeze in his tracks. When he turned back around, Ning Shui was already pointing a modified, homemade gun at him. This type of firearm was significantly more lethal than standard guns. At close range, it packed massive destructive power while remaining relatively quiet. Staring down the pitch-black barrel pointed directly at his face, Gao Pan felt his legs turn to jelly. Are you from Feng? I already told them. Give me one more week, and I will definitely pay back the money in full. Your manager already agreed to let me write an IOU. Ning Shui spoke coldly. No need to be nervous. I'm not from Feng. I am a veterinarian, specializing in treating or putting down rabid beasts in this city. You can call me Coffin. Gao Pan was stunned. In the very next second, Ning Shui pulled the trigger, completely denying him any chance to explain. The steel slug pierced straight through Gao Pan's forehead, leaving a small, bloody hole. He twitched twice before collapsing heavily onto the floor, completely motionless. After confirming Gao Pan was dead, Ning Shui stepped over to Ku's body. The young woman's death was exceptionally gruesome. Exactly as she had told Ning Shui earlier that day, this animal had used every barbaric method imaginable to torture her. Her previously flawless, pale skin was now densely covered in cuts, stab wounds, and burns. On her forehead was a circular, bloody hole drilled by the mini chainsaw. Her hair and a fragment of her skull had been tossed carelessly onto the sofa, the fresh blood still wet. In the kitchen, a pot of water was boiling violently. It seemed he had intended to pour boiling water directly over Cuckoo's exposed brain. But perhaps her mocking words had completely infuriated him, causing him to grab a hammer and smash her skull in, ending her life instantly. Ning Shui swiftly rearranged the scene, perfectly staging a murder-suicide. Every single movement was incredibly practiced, as if he had done this countless times. He wiped away every trace related to himself flawlessly. Finally, he took Cuckoo, his laptop, and left. By the time Ning Shui returned home, it was already 3 a.m. After taking a thorough shower and washing off the metallic stench of blood, Ning Shui lay down in bed. He slept soundly until noon the next day. Waking up, he opened his laptop and began searching for information regarding the alias Red Bean. This person used a brand new account, completely devoid of any personal information, including gender. But what was noteworthy was that this person's nickname had recently been changed. Obstinately deluded. Those cryptic words seemed to reflect the person's current mental state, or perhaps hinted at something deeper. The last time Red Bean contacted Cuckoo was 4 days ago. The content of the conversation was incredibly brief. Did you find it? Not yet. Just 2 short lines of messages. Ning Shui took a screenshot and sent it directly to Hamster. Hamster, help me track this person down. Hamster quickly replied, no problem. Ending the conversation, Ning Shui washed his face and went out for lunch. Cuckoo's body was discovered 3 days later. After the police launched their investigation and locked down the scene, Washing Machine actively contacted Ning Shui. Coffin, was this your handiwork? Ning Shui didn't hide it. After all, cleaning up scenes was part of his job. Yes. Cuckoo hired me to do it. Washing came personally to Ning Shui's apartment. He was a fairly handsome middle-aged man, but he constantly carried an aura of lethargy and exhaustion. Tell me the details. I need to write a report for air conditioner. Ning Shui held nothing back, recounting the entire event to Washing Machine. After carefully taking notes, Washing Machine went out with Ning Shui to grab a bowl of stir-fried noodles at a street stall before driving off in his black sedan. Over the next few days, Ning Shui didn't receive any updates from Hamster. It seemed Red Bean's whereabouts were just as elusive as that damned letter. On the 7th day, Ning Shui woke up in the dead of night. He pulled back the curtains and looked outside. Exactly as expected, a thick, dense mist had once again blanketed the surroundings. Ning Shui opened his apartment door and stepped outside. The dilapidated bus was already parked there waiting, soft snoring echoing from inside. Zzz, snore. Ning Shui boarded the bus. Sure enough, Feng was sleeping like a log, his dark sunglasses still resting on his face. Beside him was a gaudy, gold-embroidered cloth banner with 8 large characters. Fortune-telling, find me, 5 yuan per reading. Ning Shui shook his head, letting out a helpless chuckle. This guy. He found an empty seat and sat down. The dilapidated bus started up and rolled forward, plunging into the dense mist. Not long after, they once again appeared before the gates of the ghost dwelling. Ning Shui had to firmly shake the drooling Feng before the guy finally jolted awake. Great majestic heavenly dragon, great Luo Dharma mantra. Whoa! What demon or monster dares disturb my sleep? Oh, haha! It's you, brother. Why didn't you wake me up when you got on? Ning Shui watched Feng groggily rub his eyes and shook his head with a smile. Seeing you sleeping so soundly, I couldn't bear to wake you. Get off. We're here. Feng nodded, hurriedly packed up his gear, and followed Ning Shui into the ghost dwelling. Pushing the door open, they saw 2 people sitting in the living room. One was Tianshun. The teenager was glued to the TV watching the movie A Chinese Ghost Story. The other was Bai Xiaoxiao. Her long, pale legs were elegantly crossed. The flickering firelight from the stove illuminated her flawless skin, creating an enchantingly beautiful scene. Seeing them, Bai Xiaoxiao offered a friendly smile. I thought you two weren't coming. Ning Chushui shook his head. It'd be hard not to. The bus parked right outside the door to pick us up. Bai Xiaoxiao sighed, her voice tinged with a bit of lethargy. This time, do you still need me to come along as your babysitter? Both Ning Chushui and Lu Chengfeng shook their heads. Sister Bai, the difficulty of this door isn't high. Brother and I can handle it. Unlike Ning Chushui, when facing a woman as gorgeous and alluring as Bai Xiaoxiao, Lu Chengfeng always seemed a bit timid and awkward. Bai Xiaoxiao glanced at the two of them. Then, you two be careful. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. She stood up, casually ruffled Tianshen's hair, and walked toward the stairs. Before disappearing through the door, she glanced back at the two men heading upstairs, a faint smile pulling at the corners of her lips. Tianjin didn't say a word, keeping his eyes glued to the TV screen. In the teenager's mind, if these two could return alive from such a horrifying second crimson door, then this mere third door definitely wouldn't be a problem. Ning Chushui and Lu Chengfeng walked up to the third floor, staring at the bloody text appearing on the wooden door. Task: deliver the letter into the hands of the person behind the iron door. Rules: 1. You must not deliver a blood-stained letter to a woman. Each man can receive a maximum of 3 letters. 3. Cast a correct vote identifying the mastermind, and the task ends immediately. Only 1 chance allowed. Waking up once again, Ning Chushui found himself in a completely sealed, enclosed space. This place looked exactly like a prison cell. More accurately, all of them were locked inside a massive iron cage. A large industrial lamp hung suspended overhead, casting a sickly, pale light. Even with the light, Ning Chushui couldn't see the ceiling. The weak illumination seemed to be entirely swallowed by the endless darkness surrounding them. In all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, there were a total of 8 rusted iron doors. Each door had a small sliding hatch that could be pushed up and down, just about the size of a human head. Directly in the center of the iron cage sat a heavy table constructed entirely of steel. On the table rested 8 perfectly clean envelopes. Next to the envelope sat a clock, its second hand ticking forward with steady, relentless precision. In this dead, freezing, and suffocatingly gloomy space, the monotonous ticking of the clock suddenly sounded incredibly distinct, sending a chill down their spines. And on that steel table lay something else, something that made everyone's blood run cold. It was the corpse of an infant. The 8 people present exchanged glances, sheer terror evident in everyone's eyes. No one dared to step forward. "Brother, should we go take a look?" Lu Chengfeng asked softly. Ning Chushui nodded. The distance from where they stood to the steel table was quite far, and the dim lighting inside the cage made it impossible for him to clearly see the details of the infant's corpse. Ning Chushui and Lu Chengfeng were the first to approach the table. Instead of examining the envelopes, Ning Chushui focused his attention squarely on the infant's corpse. Although he wasn't a forensic examiner, he had interacted with a vast number of corpses in his line of work. With just a preliminary observation, Ning Chushui was able to reach a concrete conclusion: strangled. He spoke calmly. Lu Chengfeng frowned and replied, "It seems the core task this time is to find the murderer, more specifically, the person who murdered this child." Seeing that the 2 men hadn't triggered any traps or encountered any danger, the remaining people cautiously shuffled closer. "What is going on? Aren't we supposed to be delivering mail? Why are we locked inside a prison cell?" "I don't know either. I thought a mail delivery task would be simple. Who could have expected we'd be locked up in here?" The group began to chatter nervously, the profound panic clearly evident in their voices. Their terror was entirely understandable. The situation unfolding before them was completely different from what they had anticipated. It was safe to say they had arrived here with absolutely zero psychological preparation. Amidst the panicked murmurs, a relatively calm-looking young man stepped forward and asked Ning Chushui, "Hey brother, did you discover anything?" This young man's name was Shu Gang. After brief introductions, Ning Chushui replied, "The child on the table was strangled to death." He pointed at the infant's neck. The others followed his gaze and discovered a deep, sunken groove around the child's neck, indicating that the cervical vertebrae had undoubtedly suffered catastrophic damage. The bastard who murdered this child was incredibly vicious. They clearly wanted the baby dead instantly. It's hard to even imagine who could possibly be so ruthless as to butcher a completely defenseless infant. Perhaps because they had all survived 2 previous Crimson Doors, the overall psychological fortitude of the group was relatively decent. Seeing the infant's corpse on the table didn't trigger any extreme hysterical reactions as one might expect from rookies. It was also possible that because there were so many people present and the infant's corpse itself wasn't overwhelmingly gruesome, the psychological pressure crushing them was somewhat mitigated. All right, everyone has seen the current situation. Let's discuss this together and figure out a plan. Sheng spoke up, his voice echoing clearly throughout the room. The others looked at him. No one voiced any objections, seemingly offering tacit agreement to Sheng's proposal. There are 8 envelopes on the table, and there are 8 of us. Does this mean each of us has to deliver 1 letter? A timid girl asked softly. This girl was quite pretty. Her name was Xiang Ying. She was currently clinging tightly to the arm of the man beside her, indicating they were likely very close. Since we're all here, does it really matter who delivers them? A heavily bearded man chimed in, but he was immediately rebuked by another man. Does it matter? Great, then you go deliver all of them. Why me? Didn't you just say it doesn't matter who delivers them? The 2 bickered for a few sentences before falling back into an uneasy silence. Obviously, no one was stupid enough to not realize that delivering these letters was undoubtedly fraught with lethal, unpredictable dangers. Ning Chushui still hadn't touched the letters on the table. He scanned the surrounding area, then stepped away from the center of the room, approaching one of the iron doors to inspect it closely. Lu Chengfeng followed suit, walking over to examine a different iron door. He occasionally rubbed his chin, muttering something under his breath. The remaining few people were clearly more timid, not daring to approach those rusted iron doors. They couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that behind those heavy iron doors lurked something unspeakably horrifying. After a careful inspection, Ning Chishui discovered that the top right corner of each iron door was marked with a blood-red number. The numbers ranged sequentially from 1 to 8. The 2 doors to the north were marked 1 and 2. The west had 3 and 4, the east had 5 and 6, and the south had 7 and 8. The 8 of them were currently standing dead center among these 8 iron doors. In addition to the numbers, Ning Chushui also noticed that each iron door clearly displayed the name of the recipient for the letters. The recipient was obviously a crucial clue regarding the delivery of the mail, but what exactly did these numbers mean? While he was lost in his thoughts, Ning Chushui suddenly heard someone scream in absolute blood-curdling terror. "Oh my God! Sheng, behind you! What the hell is that?" The person screaming in terror was Sheng, the man who had entered the Crimson Door alongside Sheng. His blood-curdling scream instantly drew everyone's attention directly to Sheng's back. They saw that his back was slowly being dyed a gruesome, spreading crimson. This horrifying sight made everyone present stumble backward in shock, staring at Sheng with deep unease. Sheng naturally sensed that something was terribly wrong. He didn't dare turn his head, merely tilting it slightly as he asked, "What's wrong with everyone?" Sheng swallowed hard, asking in a trembling voice, "Sheng, do you feel wetness on your back?" Prompted by Sheng's warning, Sheng seemed to finally register the sensation. He shifted his body slightly, and his expression instantly twisted. He clearly felt a sharp, stinging pain radiating from his back. However, Sheng desperately maintained his composure. He didn't scream, nor did he make any erratic movements. He took a few deep breaths and addressed the group. "Sheng, I'm going to take my shirt off now. I want you to look at my back and tell me exactly what's there. Understood?" Sheng nodded vigorously. "Got it." With trembling hands, Sheng pulled the thin t-shirt over his head. Seeing the gruesome sight on his back, everyone froze in stunned silence. "Sheng, do you see it clearly? What the hell is on my back?" Sheng demanded anxiously. As he removed his shirt, the group finally got a clear look at exactly what was etched into his flesh. It was a bright crimson number, 5. The The reason Shu Gang felt a stinging pain was because the skin where the number was etched had been completely flayed off. Understanding his horrific condition, Shu Gang frowned, about to say something, when Ning Chushui's voice cut in. I'm certain his case isn't isolated. Every single one of us has a number carved into our backs. His words hit the group like a bucket of ice water. Focusing their senses, they all realized that their own backs felt a similar, wet, stinging sensation. Bizarrely, despite having a patch of skin flayed off, the pain wasn't excruciating, nor were they bleeding profusely. The blood seeping out was only enough to soak through a thin layer of clothing. Very quickly, they identified each other's numbers. Ning Chushui and Lu Chengfeng were numbers 1 and 2. Chu Liang and Xiang Ying were numbers 3 and 4. Shu Gang and Xie Cheng were numbers 5 and 6. And Shi and Liu Meng were numbers 7 and 8. What exactly are these numbers for? Someone asked nervously. No one answered, because no one knew the answer. But after realizing they all had a bloody number carved into their flesh, an overwhelming sense of dread blanketed the group. The Crimson Door certainly wasn't bored enough to brand them with numbers for absolutely no reason. These numbers undoubtedly held a highly specific, lethal significance. Who knows? Could it be? Is this the order in which we're gonna die? The moment this terrifying hypothesis was voiced, those assigned the lower numbers instantly turned deathly pale. Motherfucker, doesn't that mean I'm the second one to die? Lu Chengfeng's eyes bulged, looking more and more like a seasoned thug. Xiang Ying, the girl branded with the number 4, bit her lip so hard it nearly bled, tears welling up in her eyes as if she was about to cry. At that moment, Ning Chishui spoke up. Don't panic. These numbers aren't a death sequence. Look around. Those iron doors are also numbered from 1 to 8. Furthermore, even if this was a death sequence, I would be the first to die, Ning Chishui stated calmly. Everyone stared at him in sheer astonishment. Having survived 2 doors, they had encountered all sorts of people, but they had rarely seen anyone as unfathomably calm as Ning Chishui. His absolute composure somewhat alleviated the crushing terror gripping the group. If it's not an execution order, then what the hell is the purpose of these numbers? Xiang Ying demanded, plunging the group back into silence. Indeed, if the numbers carved into their flesh weren't tied to a death sequence, what special meaning did they hold? Were they a hint? What kind of cryptic message could a few simple Arabic numerals convey? While everyone was lost in silent, terrified contemplation, Ning Chushui suddenly noticed something. He stared intently at an obscured corner of the steel table, his expression abruptly shifting. In a flash, he yanked Lu Chengfeng back, his hand silently slipping the ancient book out from his coat. Lu Chengfeng didn't understand what was happening, but seeing Ning Chushui's drastic change in demeanor, he obediently stood frozen beside him. What's wrong, brother? Lu Chengfeng whispered. Ning Chushui shook his head, gesturing for complete silence. He gripped the ancient book tightly in his palm, cold sweat instantly soaking his hand. Just as Lu Chengfeng was still swimming in confusion, the clock resting on the steel table suddenly rang out.
Ding! Ding!
The rhythmic chiming sounded exactly like a mechanical alarm clock. In the dead, suffocating silence of the room, the ringing was ear-splittingly loud. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn to the chiming clock. But in the very next second, their bewildered gazes morphed into absolute apocalyptic terror. Accompanying the ringing alarm, a pair of bone-white, impossibly large hands suddenly materialized from the pitch-black darkness overhead. These sickly pale arms of an unfathomable length ended in slender fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws. Without warning, they violently snatched Enshi, the heavily bearded man. Right before everyone's horrified eyes, Enshi was violently dragged upward into the oppressive darkness. The group was paralyzed with absolute terror, staring up at the pitch-black void that had just swallowed Enshi. A few seconds later, an agonizing, heaven-shattering scream echoed from above.
Ah!
Immediately following the scream, a torrential downpour of fresh blood and shredded internal organs rained down from the ceiling. Right before their eyes, Enshi had been brutally torn to pieces. About 10 seconds after Anshi's execution, the chiming alarm clock finally fell silent. Xiang Ying, completely drenched in the raining blood, let out a hysterical shriek.
What the fuck just happened?
Another man demanded in absolute panic. Everyone's faces were deathly pale. They all knew the appearance of those horrifying hands was directly tied to the clock on the table, but no one dared approach it. Who knew if getting close would trigger another lethal underlying rule? Ningqiu Shui waited for roughly half a minute. After confirming the immediate danger had passed, he stowed the ancient book away and approached the steel table. His gaze locked onto the alarm clock. Despite the surrounding area being painted in fresh blood, the clock remained bizarrely, immaculately clean. Ningqiu Shui observed it meticulously before speaking slowly. We were all completely deceived by its appearance. This isn't an alarm clock at all. It's a countdown timer. Countdown timer. The moment those two words left his lips, everyone's nerves instantly pulled taut. Countdown? Countdown for what? Could it be counting down our lives? Several people stared up at the pitch-black ceiling in absolute panic, not daring to let their guard down for a single second, terrified that those impossibly long, bone-white hands might suddenly strike again. Standing in the center of the room, Ningqiu Shui stated calmly, "There are 8 minutes left. I'm guessing this is the time limit for delivering the mail. If we fail to deliver a single letter within these 8 minutes, it is highly likely that when the timer hits 0, another person will die." Shi Cheng's eyes widened in disbelief. What? There's a time limit for delivering mail? Everyone's expressions instantly darkened. There were less than 8 minutes remaining. If they didn't deliver a single letter within this time frame, someone else was guaranteed to be executed. Using a countdown timer to inflict crushing psychological pressure, making it drastically easier for us to make fatal misjudgments, Ningqiu Shui rubbed his chin, his gaze sweeping over the 8 envelopes resting on the steel table. Despite someone having already died, the total number of letters remained exactly the same. He picked them up one by one, examining them closely. The others also hurriedly gathered around, rapidly scanning the contents of the 8 letters. It didn't take much time, as the contents of each letter were incredibly brief, consisting of only 1 or 2 sentences. After reading them, everyone's expressions shifted subtly. These letters only have signatures, but there is no recipient. Liu Meng, a tall, slender woman, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. She and the deceased An Shi came from the same ghost dwelling. Having survived 2 previous Crimson Doors, Liu Meng understood perfectly well that you could never fully trust people from rival ghost dwellings. Now that An Shi was dead, she felt as if she had been cornered into a desperate situation. She's right. These letters only have signatures. After double-checking, Shu Gang let out a heavy sigh. Originally, they had anticipated the headache of analyzing the contents to deduce the child killer, knowing full well that someone was lying in these letters. Now, the task of identifying the murderer had become exponentially more difficult. Ningqiu Shui carefully reviewed the contents of the letters once more. They read as follows: "The director has already spoken. Just quietly sweep this under the rug. We can't let it ruin the hospital's reputation. Besides, it's not like we did anything wrong. There's no need to keep investigating. Signature, Yunwei Nurse, number 1. I love your legs. Paint your toenails red, stuff the stockings inside, and send them to me. I will remain as silent as a stone. Yueju, patient num 6. 7 years ago, I was the one who delivered her baby. At the time, their family didn't look happy at all. I genuinely thought they didn't want the child. Who could have guessed that 7 years later, they would choose to have another one? Wang Yu, Doctor No 8. Sob, sob, sob. Officer, please, you have to catch the murderer. If you don't, my mom is going to go completely insane. She's genuinely terrifying right now. Liyue, victim's older sister, number 2. If you can find the bastard who murdered my son and bring him to justice, I am willing to give you absolutely anything. Signature Wen Liang, victim's mother, number 3. This case is a nightmare to investigate. Getting called back while I was perfectly fine. Such a poor child, strangled to death so young. Show me the hospital's surveillance footage. Maybe we can find a lead. Dongquei, police officer, number 4. Rest assured. Signature, Guangzhou, patient, number 5. I just wanted a son. Why does it have to be so difficult? Please help me find the murderer. I am willing to give you absolutely anything. Li Feinuan, victim's father, number 7. This was the complete text of the 8 letters. None of them were stained with blood. The contents of these letters are a complete mess. It's impossible to tell who is writing to who, someone exclaimed in frustration. But immediately after, someone else spotted a crucial detail. No, there are actual clues here. The one speaking was Sheng. He pointed directly at letter number 2. For example, this letter. Although it doesn't explicitly state the recipient, the content specifically addresses an officer. It was obviously written to the police. Then he pointed to letters number 3 and number 7. These 2 letters are from the victim's parents. While not explicitly stated, judging by the tone and context, they were undoubtedly written to Dong Kui, the police officer. The moment Sheng finished his analysis, a wave of relief washed over everyone's faces. Chu Liang, a slightly chubby man wearing a button-down shirt, smiled. Well, that makes things simple. We just need to deliver these 3 letters directly to the police officer. He and Xiang Ying were a couple. Perhaps due to sheer terror, he hadn't spoken a single word until now, so the group hadn't formed much of an impression of him. Just as Chu Liang reached out to grab the letters, Ning Chu Shui spoke up. I strongly advise you to think carefully before you act. Chu Liang froze slightly. Think about what? Are you saying there's a trap in the letters? Ning Chu Shui shook his head, letting out a soft sigh. I genuinely don't know how you people survived your first 2 doors. Do you not remember the Crimson Door's explicit rules? It stated, each man can receive a maximum of 3 letters. If Dong Kui the police officer is a man, once he receives exactly 3 letters, we won't be able to deliver any more to him. And we will permanently lose the ability to extract any further useful information from him. Chu Liang was struck dumb. At that moment, Shui Cheng, Shugang's companion, inhaled sharply. Hiss! Thinking about it carefully, he's absolutely right. Ning Chu Shui glanced at the group and continued. In reality, these 3 letters are precisely the lethal trap the Crimson Door has laid out for us. Shugang wasn't angered by Ning Chu Shui's rebuttal. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and asked, Ning Chu Shui, can you elaborate on that? Ning Chu Shui replied, Don't forget, there is a child murderer hidden among these people. If you were the murderer, what would you do to conceal your crime? You would throw out a smokescreen, of course. And among all these individuals, the absolute only person who is guaranteed not to be the murderer is Dong Kui, the police officer. In other words, he is an incredibly vital character, whether for ultimately punishing the murderer or providing us with crucial, verified clues. Xiang Ying frowned deeply. Glancing at the alarm clock, she saw there were only 3 minutes left. Gritting her teeth anxiously, she demanded, Why are you so absolutely certain he isn't the murderer? Just because he's a cop? That's ridiculous. What if he is the murderer and is deliberately throwing out a smokescreen? You've unilaterally ruled out the possibility that he's lying right from the start, which is why you're assuming he isn't the killer. As soon as Xiang Ying finished her frantic argument, Shu Gang spoke up, his tone somber. No, he's right. Dong Kui, the police officer, absolutely cannot be the murderer. Hearing Shu Gang's absolute, unwavering certainty, everyone turned to look at him. Hey, are you out of your mind? You trust a cop that much? What if the Crimson Door is deliberately exploiting that exact psychological blind spot? Xiang Ying frowned deeply, looking intensely displeased. Shu Gang glanced at her, his hands tucked casually in his pockets. First, the signatures on the letters absolutely cannot be forged. This is a logic-based survival game. If even the signatures are fake, we wouldn't be able to gather a single piece of actionable information. From the way she addresses him, it's blatantly obvious that the victim's family and Dong Kui do not know each other personally. If they were acquainted, the young girl in the letter wouldn't have called him officer. She would have called him Uncle Dong Kui or Brother Dong Kui. Based on these 2 points alone, if I were the police officer and simultaneously the murderer, I would fundamentally require a motive. So please, tell me, what possible motive would I have to brutally murder an infant I have absolutely no connection to? Just with these 2 points, we can completely rule out Dong Kui. He has zero motive to commit the crime. Xiang Ying glanced frantically at the countdown timer on the steel table. There are only 2 minutes left. I don't care who delivers it. Just hurry up. Do you want another person to die? she urged anxiously. Hearing her shrill demands, everyone felt a surge of irritation, but no one dared to argue. After all, if the timer hit 0 and a letter hadn't been delivered, no one knew who the next victim would be. No one wanted to gamble with their own life. "Do you have any ideas, Ning Chishui?" Shu Gang frowned, pondering for a moment. Unable to find a clear opening, he turned to the man standing opposite him. "The very first letter absolutely must be delivered to a woman," Ning Chishui stated calmly. "Currently, all the letters are completely clean and unsoiled. The men only have a combined total of 3 chances to receive letters, so we must save those opportunities for when they are absolutely critical. It is best to deliver the letters one by one. That way, we can maximize our survival time and give ourselves ample time to analyze the clues. I am number 1. I will deliver the first letter." With that, he picked up one of the envelopes from the table. It was letter number 2. "I love your legs. Paint your toenails red, stuff the stockings inside, and send them to me. I will remain as silent as a stone." Signature, Yuju patient number 6, the vile words of a degenerate pervert. It was unclear exactly who he intended to send it to. Ning Chishui decided to deliver this letter to Yun Wei, the nurse behind door number 1. He carried the letter to the northern iron door and reached out, knocking lightly on the heavy metal surface marked with the number 1. Knock, knock, knock! Almost immediately, the sound of metal scraping echoed from the small sliding hatch on the iron door. Everyone stared nervously at the hatch, holding their breath in anticipation. They desperately wanted to know exactly what kind of person was lurking behind that door. The moment the hatch slid open, the 6 people standing behind Ning Chishui involuntarily took a terrified step back. Sheer, unadulterated horror painted every single face. Behind the hatch was a dead, suffocating darkness, pitch black as ink. And from within that abyssal darkness, a pair of blood-red glowing eyes stared back at them. Meeting that gaze, even someone as courageous as Ning Chishui felt a violent jolt of fear. However, he quickly regained his composure and spoke to the person inside. "There is a letter for you." With that, he slid the envelope through the hatch. After 2 agonizing seconds of silence, a sickly pale hand shot out from the opening. The hand was bone white, looking as if it had been soaking in formalin for decades. The fingernails were grotesquely long, clearly unclipped for a very long time, and the 5 emaciated fingers resembled withered, dead branches. Furthermore, the long nails were painted a glaring, blood-red color. The pale hand didn't attack Ning Chishui. It simply snatched the letter obediently and retracted into the darkness. But less than 3 seconds later, the hand shot out again. This time, clamped between its withered fingers, was a heavily blood-stained letter and a metal surgical tray. Seeing what was resting on the metal tray, everyone felt their breath catch in their throats. It was a pair of violently severed, blood-drenched woman's legs. The legs were still wearing sheer white stockings, which were now completely soaked in thick, dark crimson blood. The legs had been brutally severed just above the knee, and fresh blood was still continuously weeping from the jagged stumps. It was blatantly obvious that the person inside had just sawed them off. Ning Chishui took the blood-stained letter from Yun Wei, then carried the metal tray with the severed legs and placed it on the steel table in the center of the room. The heavy sound of the iron hatch slamming shut echoed behind him. Ning Chishui turned around. The hatch was sealed tight. No longer being stared at by those glowing, blood-red eyes, the group felt a massive wave of tension leave their bodies. Looking at the gory, severed legs resting on the table, everyone subconsciously backed away, standing opposite Ning Chishui. Blech! Shang Ying and Chu Liang, the slightly chubby man, finally couldn't hold it in anymore. They doubled over and vomited violently. The air was thick with the suffocating, metallic stench of fresh blood. Everyone's faces were deathly pale. "Brother, quickly, open the letter that female ghost gave you." Liu Chengfeng had already witnessed too many apocalyptic, blood-soaked scenes in his previous 2 doors. To him, a pair of severed legs was nothing. Feeling practically zero discomfort, his entire focus was locked onto the blood-stained envelope Yunwei had just handed Ning Chishui. Ning Chishui nodded wordlessly and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single, solitary sentence. "Please don't tell. This is incredibly important to him. As I suspected, a sharp glint flashed in Ning Chushui's eyes. Yunwei, the nurse, undoubtedly knew a massive, terrible secret, but for some unknown reason, she absolutely refused to speak of it. Not only was she unwilling to speak of it, but she actively wanted to cover it up. What exactly was she trying to hide? Why did she need to hide it? And who was the him mentioned in the letter? While he was lost in deep thought, Ning Chushui suddenly heard the alarm clock on the steel table begin to ring.
Ding! Ding!
Everyone's bodies instantly locked up in absolute terror. Their faces completely drained of blood, they simultaneously snapped their heads up to stare into the pitch-black void above, not even daring to breathe loudly. However, this time, those horrifying bone-white hands did not materialize. The alarm rang for several seconds before falling silent, immediately resetting the countdown timer for another 10 minutes. No one died. Witnessing this, everyone let out massive, shuddering sighs of relief. It really is a delivery timer. Thank God. Yes, thank God. That means we're safe for now. Right. In stark contrast to the overwhelming relief washing over the rest of the group, neither Ning Chushui nor Shu Gang showed the slightest hint of relaxation. They stared grimly at the blood-stained letter Yunwei had handed Ning Chushui, their expressions incredibly heavy. After the initial surge of profound relief, seeing the grave expressions on Ning Chushui and Shu Gang's faces, the group gradually regained their composure. Lu Meng asked tentatively, "What's wrong? Is something off?" Ning Chushui pointed at the letter resting on the steel table and explained, "We delivered a clean, unsoiled letter to the person behind the iron door, and in return, they handed us a blood-stained letter. If this is a fixed, underlying rule of the task, it means we have extremely limited opportunities to communicate with any women behind these doors, because according to the rules, a woman absolutely cannot receive a blood-stained letter. The clean letters currently in our possession will quickly run out. It seems the rules this time are incredibly strict. We only have a few precious chances to exchange information with both the men and women behind these doors. Furthermore, each letter can only be delivered once, meaning every single delivery is of paramount importance." Shang Ying spoke up again, her voice shrill. "I still feel like there is definitely something wrong with that female nurse. Who knows, she might be the actual murderer. Otherwise, why would she be so terrified of patient No. 6 revealing something? A single, vague threat in a letter terrified her so much that she literally sawed her own legs off. Doesn't that make her incredibly suspicious?" Shu Gang shook his head. "It's not that simple. You are right about one thing. That female nurse absolutely knows a crucial secret, perhaps even the entire truth. But personally, I strongly believe she is not the murderer." Letter number 9 specifically mentions another person. Although we currently don't know if this him is a man or a woman, they are undoubtedly connected to the true killer. As soon as he finished speaking, Xie Cheng also stood up. Staring at the gory, blood-drenched severed legs resting on the steel table, he couldn't suppress a violent shudder. "I'd like to add something," he said through gritted teeth. "I feel like there's something seriously wrong with patient number 6. I don't mean myself, obviously. I mean the knob, 6 behind the iron door. His mental state seems completely deranged, and he's clearly a twisted pervert. Is it possible that this person was deliberately planted by the Crimson Door to throw us off track? Maybe he actually knows absolutely nothing, and is just bluffing to extort the nurse, causing us to waste our precious clean letters on him." Everyone looked at Xie Cheng in surprise. Even Ning Chushui was slightly taken aback, thinking to himself that the people who survived to this door weren't all complete idiots after all. Xie Cheng's perspective was excellent. Given his twisted profile, patient number 6 was absolutely capable of doing something exactly like that. "So, are we going to deliver this blood-stained letter and the severed legs to him?" Lu Chengfeng scratched his head in confusion. If in the previous Crimson Door, he could still somewhat rely on common sense and survival instincts to deduce clues, in this door he was completely blind. He couldn't grasp the underlying logic at all. For Lu Chengfeng, the intellectual difficulty of this specific Crimson Door was significantly higher than the previous one. In reality, many people in the group were in the exact same boat. Investigating and solving a murder case was a job for the police. They had zero experience with this type of deductive reasoning and practically no concrete clues to work with. Ning Chishui was in the same position. He had never participated in a criminal investigation either. He could only rely on the sparse, cryptic information currently available to make educated deductions. Beardy, take this letter and deliver it to door number 7, Li Fei Nuan, victim's father. But don't give him the severed legs. After pondering for a moment, Ning Chishui handed the blood-stained letter number 9 to Liu Chengfeng. Liu Chengfeng looked bewildered. We're giving this letter to Li Fei Nuan? Yes, Ning Chishui confirmed. Originally, I wanted to test the doctor's reaction, but the fatal flaw is that we don't definitively know if the doctor is a man or a woman. Relying solely on a name to guess gender is far too risky. Liu Meng asked timidly, Then, are we not going to deliver the letter to door number 6, Yueju, patient? Weren't the letter and the severed legs originally meant for number 6 from number 1? Ning Chishui replied, It's true that number 1 wrote it for number 6, but if we deliver this letter to him, we won't be able to extract any further useful information. If you give him the legs, he will either send another letter back, make further twisted demands, or simply remain silent. If you don't give him the legs, he will undoubtedly continue to issue vague, extortive threats. Either way, the probability of us extracting concrete, actionable clues regarding the murder from him is incredibly low. There is no need to waste our time and resources on him right now. Most importantly, we don't definitively know if number 6 is a man or a woman. Although his behavior strongly suggests he's a male pervert, we don't have concrete proof. It is best not to take that risk. Any other questions? If not, Beardy, go deliver the letter. The group exchanged glances and shook their heads. The vast majority of them were completely lost, their minds a tangled mess of confusion. At this moment, seeing someone step up to lead with such composed, logical analysis, their natural instinct was to follow him for their own safety. Liu Chengfeng, naturally placing absolute trust in Ning Chishui, took the letter without hesitation and walked straight to iron door number 7, Li Fei Nuan, victim's father. Standing before the rusted iron door, he took a deep breath. Mimicking Ning Chishui's earlier actions, he raised his hand and knocked lightly 3 times.
Knock, knock, knock.
The metal hatch slid open, revealing the face of a deathly pale man. The man's facial features were completely ordinary, yet he exuded a chilling, suffocating aura of gloom. He looked at the letter Liu Chengfeng was holding and offered a polite smile. But when he opened his mouth, there were no teeth inside, nor was there a tongue. There was only a gaping, blood-red void. The man accepted the blood-stained letter. Very quickly, he slid another letter, also stained with fresh blood, back through the hatch. Then he slammed the hatch shut. Liu Chengfeng let out a massive sigh of relief. Even though he knew this specific process wasn't inherently dangerous, he couldn't stop a freezing chill from crawling down his spine. He was genuinely terrified that the pale man might suddenly reach out, grab him, and violently drag him through the iron door. Returning to the steel table, the group gathered around and opened the blood-stained letter together. 10. I don't know what you are trying to warn me about, but I swear I will find the bastard who murdered my son and take his life with my own hands. I strongly suspect that female nurse did it. She was the only one who constantly approached my wife and child. As for Dr. Wang, we are close friends. He would never betray me, and he has absolutely no reason to murder my son. The hospital definitely has surveillance cameras, right? Why don't they just check the footage? Then we would instantly know who the murderer is. Letter number 10 was quite long. After everyone finished reading it, their eyes simultaneously locked onto 2 specific words: surveillance cameras. The hospital has cameras. We can use our deliveries to request the person behind the door to check the surveillance footage. Then the truth will be completely exposed. Amidst the excited chatter, Shu Gang suddenly remembered something. He hurriedly pulled out the police officer's original letter. It was letter number 4. Dong Kui, the police officer, had also explicitly requested to see the surveillance footage. What do you think? Shu Gang looked up at Ning Chishui, who was deep in thought. Ning Chishui replied, The hospital's surveillance footage, only 2 people likely have the authority or opportunity to access it: the nurse and the doctor. As soon as he finished speaking, Shang Ying crossed her arms over her chest and chimed in. If it's that simple, why don't we just deliver one letter to each of them? We still have one clean letter left anyway. Ning Chu Shui countered. We shouldn't deliver this letter to the nurse. Shang Ying frowned deeply. What do you mean we shouldn't? Are you just trying to prove how smart you are by constantly shooting down everyone else's ideas? The recipient of the letter is the police officer. The police are investigating a murder case. Do you really think a mere nurse would dare obstruct them? With a cold sneer, she snatched letter number 6 from the table. Chu Liang, let's go deliver the letters together. You deliver the blood-stained one to the doctor. Chu Liang, the slightly chubby man, hesitated. Holding the blood-stained letter, he glanced nervously at Ning Chu Shui and Xu Gang. Seeing that both men remained silent, he anxiously walked toward door number 8. He and Shang Ying belonged to the same ghost dwelling. He couldn't afford to openly turn against her, otherwise things would be incredibly awkward for him later on. After all, they saw each other every single day. Under the watchful eyes of the remaining 5, Chu Liang and Xiang Ying, each holding a letter, approached doors number 8 and number 1 respectively. Standing before the rusted iron doors, they finally realized that delivering these letters was far more terrifying than they had imagined. Because they both knew perfectly well that the people behind these doors were absolutely not human. Even with a heavy iron door separating them, having to face such horrific monstrosities up close still made their nerves pull painfully taut. Calm down. Just calm down. It's just delivering a letter. It's within the allowed rules. Nothing bad will happen. Shang Ying took a deep breath, desperately muttering to herself. But no matter how hard she tried to self-soothe, a profound sense of dread continued to swell in her chest. As she stepped up to door number 1, that sense of impending doom grew violently intense. Her subconscious was screaming at her, "Do not hand this letter to the nurse behind the door." But Shang Ying stubbornly ignored her instincts. She had already brought the letter this far, and she had already spoken so arrogantly. If she backed down now, she would lose all face and completely forfeit any authority in the group. Therefore, she had to open this hatch. She raised her trembling hand and knocked lightly on the iron door. Thump, thump. A heavy, sickening sound echoed from inside. It sounded like something was violently scraping against the floor. The piercing, screeching friction made her scalp go completely numb. Shang Ying stumbled back a step, the hand holding the letter shaking uncontrollably. What's going on? Her face drained of all color, completely unable to comprehend what was happening. Earlier, that female nurse sawed her own legs off. Right now, she's probably dragging herself across the floor. Shay Cheng's casual, chilling observation nearly made Shang Ying collapse to her knees. A horrifying image instantly flashed in her mind. A legless female ghost, using her razor-sharp claws to violently drag her bloody torso across the floor, slowly crawling toward her. Motherfucker, Shang Ying cursed silently in her heart. It took nearly a full minute before the nurse behind the door finally slid the hatch open. The agonizing wait was pure psychological torture. The group could clearly see that Shang Ying's back was already completely drenched in cold sweat. Finally, with a sharp screech of metal, the hatch on door number 1 slid open. But what appeared in the opening wasn't a hand. It was a deathly pale, vacant woman's face. Her glowing blood-red eyes darted erratically. She didn't look at Shang Ying. Instead, her gaze locked directly onto the steel table behind her. Did he agree? The person behind the door suddenly stretched her lips into a sickly, twisted smile. My legs, they're incredibly delicious, very fresh. I just chopped them off. Once he eats them, he won't say a word. Shang Ying was so terrified by the ghostly, echoing voice that she stumbled back several steps. By now, cold sweat was pouring down her face. Facing that deathly pale face that looked as if it might lunge out through the hatch at any moment, Shang Ying's mind went completely blank. She even forgot she was supposed to deliver the letter. It wasn't until she heard Chu Liang shouting from behind her that she finally snapped out of her paralyzing terror. Don't listen to her. Just give her the letter. The shout jolted Shang Ying awake. Gritting her teeth, she stepped forward and shoved the letter toward the person behind the door. The female nurse stared at Sheng Ying for a long time with her terrifying eyes before slowly shifting her gaze down to the letter in her hand. "Is this a letter for me?" The nurse extended her bone-white hand, took the letter, and slowly retracted back into the darkness. Seeing the nurse accept the letter, the entire group let out a collective sigh of relief. Thank God. As long as the nurse accepted the letter, everything should be fine. Just moments ago, they were genuinely terrified that the female nurse might forcefully squeeze her way out through that narrow hatch. Sheng Ying remained standing in front of the door, waiting in silence. Based on the previous delivery, after accepting a letter, the person behind the door would quickly hand back a different letter. But this time, the wait seemed unnervingly long. Just as Sheng Ying began to grow anxious, the hatch slid open again. She was about to step forward to receive the letter when suddenly a bone-white, emaciated hand shot out from the darkness and clamped down viciously on her wrist. An apocalyptic, freezing chill instantly radiated from the hand, surging up Sheng Ying's arm. She shrieked in absolute terror. "Ah! Motherfucker! Let go of me!" Sheng Ying thrashed wildly, frantically beating against the bone-white hand with her free fist, even kicking the door. If she wasn't so paralyzed by fear, she probably would have tried to bite it. But her struggles were completely futile. The hand behind the door was like a steel vice, crushing her wrist with inescapable force. "What are you people doing? Don't just stand there! Save me!" In this life-or-death crisis, the already timid Sheng Ying completely lost her mind, screaming hysterically for help. But no matter how viciously she cursed or how pitifully she begged, not a single person stepped forward. Everyone remained frozen in place, watching helplessly as that bone-white hand violently dragged Sheng Ying toward the iron door. "Hurry up! I'm begging you, save me!" As her entire arm was yanked through the hatch, Sheng Ying wailed in absolute despair. She was genuinely terrified. But she wasn't the only one consumed by fear. No one dared to step forward to save her. Or more accurately, the one person who desperately wanted to save her completely lacked the courage to step forward. Everyone's faces were deathly pale and incredibly grim. By now, Sheng Ying's entire arm had been dragged into the darkness, yet the person behind the door showed absolutely no intention of letting go. Sheng Ying was still being violently pulled inside. Sheng Ying was dragged through the iron hatch, her panicked shrieks rapidly escalating into apocalyptic, blood-curdling screams. She wailed hysterically, her vocal cords tearing. A paralyzing agony mixed with absolute terror surged like an electric current up her arm, hijacking her entire nervous system. Her legs thrashed desperately in the air. Her neck and head were jammed brutally against the narrow opening, twisting at a grotesque, unnatural angle. Crack, snap, crunch. The sickening sound of shattering bone echoed through the room. Sheng Ying's eyes bulged, overflowing with unimaginable horror and venomous resentment, but the life rapidly drained from them. During the violent process of being pulled through the iron hatch, Sheng Ying's spine had been completely snapped. The square hatch was small, barely wide enough for a human head to squeeze through. A human body could never possibly fit. But somehow, through sheer monstrous force, Sheng Ying was still being dragged inside. Amidst the relentless, nauseating sound of bones being pulverized, Sheng Ying's body was practically compressed into a mangled, blood-soaked lump of flesh as she disappeared into the darkness. From behind the iron door, the eerie, ghostly whispering of a woman drifted out. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But I can't. I truly can't. I cannot let her know the truth." It was Yunwei's voice. She muttered to herself for a long time, repeating those exact same phrases in a maddening loop. Finally, Yunwei fell silent. And with that, the hatch on door number 1 slammed shut. The survivors in the central cage jolted as if waking from a nightmare. Thud! Chu Liang, the slightly chubby man who had accompanied Sheng Ying, suddenly dropped to his knees. He clutched his head tightly with both hands, his face deathly pale as he frantically muttered to himself, How could this happen? Why? The letter she was holding. The letter clearly wasn't stained with blood. Why? Why did she die? Why? The expressions of the remaining survivors were incredibly grim. They finally realized the horrifying truth. Simply adhering strictly to the Crimson Door's explicit rules did not guarantee their safety. We should have realized this earlier. Shu Gang ground his teeth. The rules etched on the door only highlight the most critical restrictions. It wasn't going to spoon-feed us every single underlying rule of this world. It seems, even if we don't deliver a blood-stained letter to a woman, we can still be executed. Ning Chishui maintained his composure, as if he had anticipated this exact outcome. Whether we deliver to a man or a woman isn't the only deciding factor. The actual content of the letter relative to the recipient is equally crucial, he stated calmly. I explicitly warned her not to deliver that specific letter. The group fell silent. Following Shang Ying's gruesome death, Ning Chushui's status within the group skyrocketed to an entirely new level. They finally recognized that this man named Ning Chushui didn't just possess nerves of steel. He was incredibly sharp. Can you explain that more clearly? Lu Meng asked. Ever since her teammate, Anshi, was brutally murdered by the bone-white hands descending from the ceiling, she had become extremely cautious and on edge. Ning Chushui explained, during the delivery process, we are undoubtedly navigating a web of hidden, lethal triggers. Don't forget, the people standing behind these iron doors aren't actual human beings. They are vengeful wraiths. I don't need to spell out the consequences of infuriating a vengeful wraith. How exactly do you think we trigger their rage? It's quite simple. Take Yunwei behind door number 1, for example. Based on the content of the letters, we can deduce that she is desperately trying to conceal a terrible secret in order to protect someone. Therefore, if she receives a letter indicating that we intend to dig up the truth she's trying to bury, she will undoubtedly choose to slaughter us to achieve her goal. Or consider Dong Kui, the police officer in charge of investigating the murder behind door number 4. If we deliver a letter to him indicating an intent to cover up the crime, it is highly likely he will arrest us, or even execute us on the spot. Furthermore, after executing someone, the wraiths will naturally refuse to hand over a new letter in exchange. Hearing this analysis, everyone's face is drained of color. Motherfucker, Chuliang trembled, cold sweat pouring down his forehead. This crimson door is incredibly insidious. Just moments ago, he and Shang Ying were the ones delivering the letters. If they had swapped their letters, the person who just died would have been him. Ring, 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 ring. The alarm clock on the steel table began to chime again, but this time, no one paid it any mind. They all understood the underlying mechanic now. As long as they completed a successful delivery, they secured a 10-minute window of absolute safety. Right, Chuliang. Bring out the letter you received from the doctor, Ning Chushui instructed. Chuliang nodded numbly and placed the letter on the table. This letter, like the others they had received back, was heavily stained with fresh crimson blood. I have reviewed the surveillance footage, but I am deeply conflicted. Should I really reveal the truth? I finally understand why the director and Nurse Yunwei adamantly refused to continue the investigation. If I expose the truth, would that be too selfish of me? Perhaps I should just delete the footage. What should I do? The contents of the letter plunged the group into a heavy silence. The surveillance cameras had successfully recorded the entire truth behind the murder. Yet it seemed that whoever viewed the footage was instantly compelled to abandon the investigation. Why? It seemed they all shared the same sentiment. Pursuing the truth would bring catastrophic ruin to this family. This is an incredibly vital clue, Shu Gang exclaimed, a hint of excitement coloring his voice. The reactions of the doctor and the nurse after discovering the truth were remarkably similar. Their behavior didn't align with that of murderers. Rather, they acted as if they desperately wanted to cover for the murderer. Who would the hospital staff feel compelled to protect so fiercely? Could it be the murderer is actually one of the 3 family members? Liu Chengfeng, who had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly spoke up. Everyone immediately turned to look at him. Their intense, burning gazes startled Liu Chengfeng, making him take a half step back. I was just throwing out a wild guess. Just a guess. Ning Chushui shook his head. No, you're not wrong. It is highly probable that the murderer is one of those 3. Liu Chengfeng was stunned. No way, I was literally just spitballing. Ning Chushui smiled faintly. You weren't just spitballing. Brother, did you discover something? Ning Chushui was silent for a moment. Do you remember the numbers carved into our backs? Mentioning the numbers instantly jolted everyone's memory, reminding them of the crucial detail that had been completely overshadowed by the recent apocalyptic bloodshed. Honestly, the first 3 crimson doors, excluding special cases, aren't impossibly difficult, as long as you are meticulous and cautious. Earlier, when we discovered the numbers on our backs, I immediately wondered what their significance was. If it was merely a simple identification tag, the crimson door wouldn't have gone to the extreme of flaying a massive chunk of skin off our backs just to emphasize the importance of the numbers. Then, I compared our situation with the layout of the iron doors. Exactly 8 chosen people corresponding to 8 numbered doors. So what commonality do we share with the people lurking behind those doors? Ning Chushui spoke slowly, and everyone listened with rapt attention. First is gender. We can immediately rule that out. Yunwei and I are different genders. Even if we assume the pairing is inverted, Anxi was number 7, but the person behind door number 7 is Li Feinuan, the victim's father. The genders still don't align. Therefore, the correlation between us and the people behind the doors is absolutely not based on gender. After ruling out gender, I noticed another crucial detail. There are exactly 4 teams of chosen people who entered this crimson door, and every single team consists of exactly 2 people. Think carefully about the number carved into your back and the number on your teammate's back, then look at the layout of the iron doors. You'll understand immediately. Hearing this, everyone hurriedly mentally verified the numbers. After a brief moment of recollection, they quickly discovered the vital connection. 2 people from the same ghost dwelling were assigned sequential numbers, which perfectly corresponded to 2 iron doors positioned in one of the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. Ning Chushui, are you saying the 2 people locked behind the doors in each of the 4 directions also form a team? Prompted by Ning Chushui's analysis, Shu Gang seemed to grasp something incredibly crucial. You can interpret it simply as, they share the exact same underlying motive. Let's tentatively assume this deduction is correct and analyze the board. Nurse 1 and the victim's older sister 2 both do not want the murderer caught. Police officer 4 and the victim's mother 3 absolutely do want the murderer caught. Patients 5 and 6 do not want the murderer caught. Dr. 8 and the victim's father 7 do want to find the murderer. Please note, this represents their initial psychological baseline before any letters were exchanged. Now, through the recent exchanges, let's reverse engineer the situation to see if these baseline deductions hold up. Ning Chishui did his utmost to simplify his complex thought process for the group. First, the doctor and the victim's father initially desperately wanted to hunt down the murderer. We can clearly feel this from their responses in letters 10 and 11. However, after viewing the surveillance footage, the doctor hesitated, and his stance began to diverge from the father's. But that's a subsequent development, so we'll set it aside for now. Next are patients 5 and 6. Based on our deduction, neither of them wants the murderer found. Let's look at patient 6 first. This is a twisted psychopath who wants to exploit the current situation to satisfy his depraved desires. Once the murderer is caught and the case is closed, he can no longer use this leverage to extort the nurse or anyone else involved. Therefore, from his twisted perspective, he absolutely does not want this to end quickly. Then there's patient 5. His response letter was incredibly brief. Why so brief? Because talking too much exposes flaws. He is obviously desperately trying to hide something as well. And in this specific scenario, the only thing worth hiding is the truth behind the murder. From this, we can deduce that he also does not want the killer caught so quickly. So looking at it this way, the underlying motives of patients 5 and 6 perfectly align. After Ning Chushui finished his analysis, Lu Meng bit her lip and asked, "Wait, that's not right. Based on your logic, doesn't that create a paradox? The nurse behind door number 1 refuses to reveal the truth, but the victim's older sister behind door number 2 wrote a letter begging the police to quickly uncover the truth." As she spoke, a freezing chill suddenly shot down her spine. Lu Meng seemed to realize the horrifying implication. She slowly raised her head and swallowed hard. "Are you saying that little girl lied in her letter? She actually doesn't want the truth to be exposed. The third letter on the table was written by the doctor behind door 8, stating that 7 years ago he had delivered a baby for this exact family. Calculating the timeline, the child born 7 years ago was the victim's older sister, which meant the girl behind door number 2 was only 7 years old. The little girl couldn't possibly be the murderer, right? She's only 7 years old. Furthermore, she has absolutely no motive to murder her own newborn brother. Chu Liang, the slightly chubby man, felt a wave of apocalyptic terror wash over him at the horrifying thought that just popped into his head. A 7-year-old girl strangling her newborn baby brother to death with her own bare hands. We still can't say for absolute certainty if it's her, but she is highly suspicious. Moreover, she does have a motive for murder. Shu Gang pulled out the 8th letter from the table. The father in this family heavily favors sons over daughters. It's highly probable that the girl was neglected, despised, or even abused within the household. If that's true, she absolutely possesses a motive to murder her brother. Deducing from this point, I strongly agree with Ning Chushui's earlier assessment. For some unknown reason, this little girl genuinely does not want the police to uncover the truth. She either witnessed the truth, or she is the murderer herself. Everyone stared at the letters on the table, plunging into a heavy silence. So who should I deliver a letter to next? Shu Gang voiced the critical question. He seemed to be asking the group, but also asking himself. He stared intently at the letters on the steel table, his eyes flickering between sharp calculation and utter bewilderment. At that moment, Ning Chushui, standing beside him, suddenly asked, "Do you have the guts to take a massive risk?" Shu Gang turned his head and looked at Ning Chushui. "What kind of risk?" Ning Chushui replied, "You deliver a highly dangerous letter to the little girl. If you survive, it conclusively proves that our previous deduction is 100% correct." Shu Gang stiffened. He instantly understood exactly which letter Ning Chushui wanted him to deliver to the girl. "You want me to deliver the first letter to the child behind door no. 2? Ning Chushui nodded, speaking with brutal honesty. "I cannot quantify the exact level of danger. If my previous deduction is wrong, you risk being instantly executed by the little girl. I have no right to force you to gamble your life for the benefit of the group. Therefore, you are completely free to choose a safer letter to deliver." Shu Gang seriously contemplated Ning Chushui's proposal. This was undeniably a suicidal gamble. If their deduction was correct, the little girl behind door number 2 also desperately wanted the truth to remain buried. In that scenario, if he delivered Yunwei's letter, which vehemently expressed a desire to cover up the truth, she would not execute him. But conversely, if their deduction was wrong and the little girl genuinely wanted the truth exposed, delivering that specific letter would highly likely cost him his life. Just as he fell silent in contemplation, Shay Cheng, standing beside him, suddenly snatched the first letter. "Motherfucker, I'll do it!" Shi Cheng ground his teeth. "Old Shu, I owe you my life from our previous Crimson Door. If I die, consider the debt paid in full. If I don't die, we take a massive step closer to the truth." Shu Gang grabbed his wrist and shook his head slightly, signaling him not to act impulsively. The situation hasn't deteriorated to the point where we need to take such a blind, suicidal risk. Shi Cheng countered. "None of us are professional criminal investigators. As time drags on, who knows what apocalyptic horrors we'll face next. The longer we drag this out, the worse it gets for everyone. Did you forget what we barely survived in our first door?" At the mention of their first Crimson Door, the corner of Shu Gang's mouth twitched uncontrollably. That previous Crimson Door had left Shu Gang with incredibly vivid, terrifying memories. Occasionally, in the dead of night, it would even claw its way back into his nightmares. Their first door was a rigid, logic-based, deductive puzzle. Although there was only one murderous ghost hidden among them, and its ability to kill was heavily restricted, they had wasted 3 full days inside the instance without a single casualty. But on the 4th day, 5 people were suddenly slaughtered. After escaping that Crimson Door and returning to their ghost dwelling, listening to the explanations of the veterans, they finally understood. In many deduction-based instances, the supernatural power and freedom of the ghosts are gradually unleashed as time progresses. Initially, a crimson door might only have a single lethal underlying rule, or perhaps none at all. But as time drags on, the world behind the door could manifest 2, 3, or even more apocalyptic execution rules. The two of them had no idea if the current instance operated on the same escalating mechanics, and they absolutely lacked the capital to gamble their lives to find out. Don't worry, old shoe. Brother Ning is absolutely right. The numbers carved into our backs definitely possess a highly specific, crucial meaning. Since we've already ruled out several other possibilities, what's left must be the truth. I won't die that easily. Hearing Shi Cheng's reassurance, Shu Gang finally let go of his wrist. Be extremely careful. The second you sense something is wrong, run immediately. Those ghosts absolutely cannot step through the iron doors. Hearing Shu Gang's warning, Shi Cheng smiled. Got it. Gripping the letter tightly, he walked straight toward the second iron door. He took a few deep breaths to calm his racing heart, then knocked firmly on the metal. Knock, knock, knock! The little girl behind this door opened the hatch surprisingly fast. The moment Shi Cheng laid eyes on her, he froze in absolute shock. It was as if he had witnessed something unimaginably horrific. He stood rooted to the spot for a long time, completely motionless like a block of wood. Shi Cheng, hurry up and deliver the letter. It wasn't until Shu Gang shouted from behind that Shi Cheng finally snapped out of his daze, hurriedly shoving the envelope through the hatch. Little sister, this is a letter for you. The little girl timidly extended a sickeningly emaciated arm and took the envelope. Seeing the girl's arm, Shi Cheng completely solidified the theory in his mind. The heart that had been lodged in his throat finally settled back into his chest. Shi Cheng knew with absolute certainty that the little girl before him would not kill him. Sure enough, after just a few short seconds, the girl pulled out a blood-stained letter and handed it back to him. Thank you, little sister. Shi Cheng suddenly uttered those 4 words. A flicker of hesitation flashed in the eyes of the little girl behind the door, but she quickly slammed the hatch shut regardless. Clutching the blood-stained letter, Shi Cheng returned to the center of the room. Seeing that he had returned completely unharmed, the group collectively let out a massive sigh of relief. Everyone guessed correctly. That little girl has suffered from horrific, prolonged domestic abuse. Her entire body is covered in wounds. Her face, her arms, her neck. Everywhere. The fact that I was able to return alive definitively proves that she genuinely does not want the mastermind behind the murder to be uncovered. Shi Cheng's voice was heavy with grim realization. He seemed to finally understand why the hospital's doctor and nurse were so desperate to prevent the murderer from being caught. If this little girl had truly been subjected to horrific domestic abuse year after year, and she was the one who strangled her newborn brother to death, then once the truth was exposed, her reaction conclusively proves that our previous deduction was 100% accurate. The people behind doors 1 and 2 share the exact same motive. As the young daughter of the victim's family, yet vehemently opposed to the murderer being caught, it seems practically guaranteed that she is the killer. Ning Chushui rubbed his chin, his gaze sharp and calculating. Because this was only one of the first 3 crimson doors, barring any anomalous mutations, the difficulty naturally wouldn't be apocalyptic. The numbers carved into their backs, corresponding perfectly to the numbers on the iron doors, could be seen as a massive back door deliberately left by the crimson door, a direct shortcut to the truth, significantly lowering the deductive difficulty of the instance. But do we really want to expose the truth? The one speaking was Liu Meng. She kept her head bowed, her hair obscuring her face, making it impossible for the others to read her expression or guess what she was thinking. But they all clearly heard the profound hesitation trembling in her voice. Why wouldn't we? Chu Liang, the chubby man, demanded. All we have to do is cast our vote identifying the murderer, and we can immediately leave this hellish game. As soon as the words left his mouth, he was brutally cut off by Ning Chishui's icy voice. I need to correct a fatal misconception you hold. The third rule etched on the crimson door states, cast a correct vote identifying the mastermind, and the task ends immediately. But the task ends absolutely does not mean we can leave this place alive. Those are 2 entirely separate concepts. Chuliang was stunned. The others shared his bewildered expression, not entirely grasping Ning Chushui's point. Only Lu Chengfeng, who had survived the apocalyptic second Crimson Door alongside Ning Chushui, instantly understood exactly what he meant. "It's another word game," Lu Chengfeng muttered in horror. Ning Chushui nodded slightly. "Exactly, another lethal word game." Although the first 3 Crimson Doors for rookies aren't designed to be impossible, given that the door has deliberately handed us such a massive back door, deducing the true murderer behind the scenes is simply far too easy. Look at the letters remaining on the table. How many have we actually used? Don't you feel that winning this game is simply too easy? So easy that it's completely abnormal. The group plunged into a terrified silence. A sharp glint flashed in Shugang's eyes. Our explicit task for this Crimson Door is deliver the letter into the hands of the person behind the iron door. Therefore, when we correctly cast our vote and identify the murderer, the task ending simply means we no longer have to continue delivering letters. It absolutely does not state that we are allowed to leave this place and return to our world. The horrifying realization finally crashed over everyone. Motherfucker. They actually buried a lethal linguistic trap right in the open. Those who grasped the implication felt a freezing sweat drench their backs. They recalled their previous Crimson Doors, all of which had a strict, explicit time limit. This one didn't. It turned out the Crimson Door was deliberately digging an apocalyptic grave for them. If that's the case, after the task ends, what exactly will happen? Liu Meng asked weakly. Ning Chushui rubbed his chin, his dark, profound gaze sweeping over the rusted iron doors surrounding them. "I don't know for sure, but I suspect we will face a final judgment. The path to survival isn't here. Correctly identifying the murderer is definitely related to unlocking that path, but it is not the path itself. Only by discovering the true path to survival can we possibly survive the final judgment." Drawing from his apocalyptic experience behind the second Crimson Door, Ning Chushui had already anticipated this hidden layer of lethal complexity. Even if they managed to deduce the true mastermind behind the murder and cast the correct vote, would this hellish trial simply end? He severely doubted it would be that straightforward. Therefore, Ning Chushui meticulously reviewed the Crimson Door's explicit rules and hints in his mind one more time. Relying solely on a few brief, cryptic letters to deduce a murderer was inherently an incredibly complex, multi-layered task. At least, it was for ordinary people like them. However, when factoring in the numbers violently carved into their backs and perfectly matched with the numbers on the iron doors, the difficulty plummeted. By simply finding the commonality between these sequential pairings, they could rapidly deduce the identity of the child killer. Because among all these people, with their wildly different identities, relationships, and motives, the little girl was the only one who was overtly framed as a helpless victim, yet inexplicably, vehemently opposed the truth being uncovered. If simply casting a vote identifying her was the sole requirement to clear the task and survive, then the difficulty of this Crimson Door was shockingly low. If this were the very first Crimson Door, it might be plausible. But for a third Crimson Door, there were undoubtedly far more lethal traps buried beneath the surface. The group fell into a suffocating silence as the seconds ticked by. Several people kept casting nervous, anxious glances toward Iron Door number 2. They were growing increasingly desperate, because the countdown timer on the steel table showed less than 2 minutes remaining. If they didn't cast a vote to end the task, they absolutely had to deliver the next letter. Finally, Ning Chushui broke the silence. Voting for the little girl as the murderer is highly likely a death trap. His gaze was razor-sharp and unwavering. The group was startled. Liu Meng asked quickly, "Did you discover something?" Ning Chushui answered bluntly, "Intuition. I trust my intuition. It has saved my life more times than I can count. If we vote for the little girl as the murderer, the moment those 8 iron doors swing open, she might die, but we will highly likely die as well. There's one crucial detail everyone can see clearly. If this Crimson Door's ultimate goal was simply to identify the child murderer, then that should have been listed as our primary task. Yet, the Crimson Door deliberately buried it under the rules section." Everyone nodded slightly in agreement. That point was logical and easy to grasp. Reverse engineering this logic, it implies that our ultimate goal here is not merely finding the child killer. Hearing this, a jolt of realization ran through the group. This new line of reasoning opened up an entirely different perspective. If identifying the child murderer was the absolute ultimate goal, the Crimson Door would never have relegated it to a mere rule or hint. So you're saying the person we need to cast our vote for might not be. Shu Gang's sharp mind instantly grasped the lethal nuance. The rule states we must correctly identify the mastermind, not just the murderer. There is a massive distinction between those two terms. The word correct dictates whether we survive, while mastermind points to the overarching truth behind this entire scenario. Ning Chushui shook his head. He didn't fully understand what Shu Gang was getting at. He genuinely despised dissecting things word by word like that. Hurry up! There's less than half a minute left. Shi Cheng frantically warned them. Ning Chushui thought for a split second, then turned to Shu Gang. Shu Gang, take the little girl's letter, let her know 2, and deliver it to her mother behind door no. 3. The little girl's letter? Yes, the 4th envelope. Got it, Shu Gang nodded curtly. Ning Chushui's performance thus far had earned his complete trust. Without a second of hesitation, he grabbed the 4th envelope and marched straight toward door number 3. Pay very close attention to that woman's appearance, Ning Chushui instructed from behind. Shu Gang flashed an OK sign and knocked on door number 3. When the metal hatch slid open, Shu Gang shoved the letter into the woman's waiting hand. Simultaneously, his eyes locked onto the woman behind the door. She was horrifyingly emaciated, her expression completely vacant and dead. Her skin was a sickly, translucent white, radiating an aura of severe, prolonged malnutrition. As if feeling he was standing too far away, Ning Chushui personally stepped up, moving right next to the iron door to observe the woman inside. After a brief, agonizing silence, the woman handed back a blood-stained letter, then slammed the hatch shut. During that brief exchange, Ning Chushui stared intently at her arm. Just as the hatch closed, the alarm clock on the table rang out, its piercing, mechanical chime once again flooding the silent room. Bang! A terrifying, violent crash suddenly echoed from directly above them. The sound instantly triggered horrific memories of what had happened earlier. The man named Anshi had been inexplicably, brutally slaughtered by the impossibly long, bone-white hands descending from that exact same darkness. When they snapped their heads up to trace the sound, the apocalyptic sight hanging above them elicited a collective, blood-curdling scream. The pitch-black darkness masking the ceiling had vanished. In its place hung a colossal, grotesque marionette, nearly 10 meters tall, suspended by thick, taut ropes anchored to the ceiling. It glared down at the humans below with glowing, bloodshot eyes, an expression of ravenous, insatiable hunger twisted onto its wooden face. Its massive, gaping maw was like a pool of fresh blood, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Chunks of unidentifiable, bloody meat were visibly wedged between them. The thick ropes restraining it looked as if they were on the verge of snapping. The colossal marionette thrashed its massive arms wildly, desperately swiping at the people below, but the tension of the ropes kept it just inches out of reach. However, it was only inches. If those ropes loosened even a fraction more, the people below would be instantly snatched. The violent crash they had just heard was the sound of the ropes suddenly giving way, allowing the marionette's massive arms to drop significantly lower. How is this possible? Lu Meng was utterly paralyzed with terror. Recalling the gruesome, pulverized remains of her teammate, she scrambled frantically to hide underneath the heavy steel table. The others instantly followed suit. Fortunately, the steel table was massive enough to provide cover for all of them. They cowered underneath for 2 agonizing minutes. When no further movement came from above, they finally dared to cautiously peek their heads out. The terrifying, colossal marionette was still thrashing wildly, but it genuinely couldn't reach them yet. Did we trigger another execution rule? Shu Gang frowned deeply. Ning Chushui stared intently at the alarm clock resting on the steel table above them and shook his head slightly. It's the time. This instance has a hard time limit. Although the task description didn't explicitly state it, the terrifying mutation of the thing hanging above us reveals everything. The Crimson Door is using this escalating apocalyptic threat to force us into making a rapid, fatal decision. Hearing this, everyone felt a freezing chill paralyze their hearts. Looking up at the horrifying, clawed hands thrashing less than half a meter above their heads, an icy dread washed over them. They had absolutely no idea when this monstrosity would suddenly drop again, randomly snatching up one lucky victim. Then what do we do? How are we supposed to deliver the next letter? Chu Liang, the chubby man, was completely consumed by panic, his lips trembling so violently he could barely form words. We don't need to deliver any more letters. I know exactly who the mastermind is that we need to vote for. Ning Chishui spoke, his profound gaze locking onto the terrified group. What? You found the path to survival? Hearing Ning Chishui's words, the group erupted in profound relief and joy. Oh my God, brother, you are absolutely incredible. Liu Chengfeng's face beamed with undisguised elation. Getting hard carried through a crimson door while doing the bare minimum. Being the boss was certainly comfortable, but being hard carried, that was pretty damn comfortable too. Shu Gang looked at Ning Chishui, his eyes swimming with complex emotions, a mixture of deep admiration and genuine respect. Naturally, there was also a sliver of profound regret. He desperately wished Ning Chishui belonged to his ghost dwelling. That way, he could learn from someone of this caliber, and they could grow stronger together. But Shu Gang understood perfectly well. Once you are chosen by the mist-shrouded world, if you want to survive long-term, you must ultimately rely on yourself. Then, let's hurry up and cast the vote. The fat on Chu Liang's face jiggled. His eyes kept darting nervously toward the apocalyptic marionette hanging above them. One hand gripped the edge of the steel table, looking as if he was ready to dive back underneath at a moment's notice. He genuinely didn't want to stay in this hellish room for a single second longer. Ning Chishui's gaze swept over the group. There is one final thing I need to verify. It might be slightly dangerous, though not overwhelmingly so. But if I die, you guys must cast your vote, identifying the victim's parents as the murderers. Ning Chishui's voice was incredibly calm, as if he were recounting a perfectly mundane daily chore, but his words sent a fresh wave of terror rippling through the group. Brother, what exactly are you planning to do? Standing beside Ning Chishui, Liu Chengfeng grew incredibly anxious hearing that he was about to take another risk. Ning Chishui explained, "It shouldn't be an issue. I need to clarify one final detail." With that, under the bewildered and terrified gazes of the group, he walked straight toward iron door number 2. Then he reached out and knocked lightly.
Knock, knock!
Following his knocks, the metal hatch on door number 2 slid open. The face of a little girl appeared before Ning Chishui. Even Ning Chishui was slightly taken aback. He suddenly understood why Shay Cheng had frozen in such profound shock when delivering the letter earlier, because the little girl's face was completely covered in horrific, gruesome scars. There were wounds inflicted by knives or blunt instruments, and there were also horrifying burn marks. Her eyes were brimming with absolute terror. Unlike the other people behind the doors, she seemed genuinely terrified of something. Ning Chishui leaned closer to the hatch, asking the little girl softly, "Are you scared?" The little girl looked at the man outside the door in surprise, a flicker of confusion crossing her eyes. She neither nodded nor shook her head. After a moment of silence, she moved somewhat stiffly, attempting to hand a blood-stained letter back to Ning Chishui. But instead of taking the letter, Ning Chishui shoved his hand through the hatch and firmly grabbed her wrist. This action nearly gave the people watching from behind a heart attack. They were all avoiding the people behind the doors like the plague, yet Ning Chishui was actively initiating physical contact. He was practically begging for death. Liu Chengfeng instinctively lunged forward to intervene, but Ning Chishui barked without turning around. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not move." The group hesitated for a split second, then froze in place. Ning Chishui shifted his focus entirely back to the little girl. Pressing his face close to the iron hatch, he lowered his voice and said, "I know you are the one who strangled your little brother, but I won't tell anyone." The little girl's body trembled violently at first, but she quickly settled down. She raised her bewildered eyes again, now carrying 3 parts fear and 7 parts incomprehension. Perhaps sensing the absolute sincerity in Ning Chushui's eyes, she slowly, barely perceptibly, nodded her head. She let out a soft, But I want to know, why did you want to kill your baby brother? When Ning Chushui asked this question, tears of thick crimson blood began to stream from the little girl's eyes. She raised her heavily scarred hands, haphazardly wiping away the bloody tears, and uttered words that completely stunned Ning Chushui. Mom and Dad, they don't like children. Every time they hit me so hard. It hurts so much. It hurts so much. I was terrified my little brother would end up just like me, being beaten and tortured by Mom and Dad every single day. So I strangled him. Listening to the little girl's broken, sobbing confession, Ning Chushui felt a massive, suffocating lump lodge in his throat. For a long time, he couldn't utter a single syllable. He finally understood why the hospital's director, the doctor, the nurse, and even a grateful patient were all so desperately trying to prevent the police from uncovering the truth, because every single one of them wanted to protect this pitiful, heartbreakingly innocent little girl. The little girl truly had strangled her newborn brother, but it wasn't out of jealousy. It was out of absolute terror. This little girl fundamentally didn't understand that her parents abused her because they violently favored sons over daughters. In her heartbreaking innocence, she genuinely believed her parents simply didn't like children. Terrified that her newborn brother would suffer the exact same fate as her, being brutally tortured and beaten day and night, she made the agonizing choice to kill him to spare him from that hell. From the profound fear swimming in her eyes, Ning Chushui knew she understood the severe consequences of murder, yet she had still gone through with it. Although her actions were objectively wrong, the root cause of this entire apocalyptic tragedy wasn't her, it was her monstrous parents. Learning the horrifying truth, Ning Chushui stood frozen in stunned silence for a very long time. He didn't feel a shred of relief. Conversely, his heart felt as if it were being crushed by a massive boulder, making it nearly impossible to breathe. I understand now. After 2 or 3 minutes of absolute silence, Ning Chushui finally snapped back to reality. He released the little girl's arm and gently wiped away the bloody tears staining her scarred face. You didn't kill your brother. Your parents are the ones who killed him. Ning Chushui left her with those parting words. He stood up, and under the bewildered gaze of the little girl behind the hatch, silently walked back to the central steel table. Brother, what did you say to her? Seeing Ning Chushui return unharmed, Liu Chengfeng let out a massive sigh of relief and was the first to rush over. Ning Chushui shook his head. I'll tell you later. Let's cast the vote and identify the mastermind first. He deliberately didn't tell Liu Chengfeng the truth right away, knowing perfectly well Liu Chengfeng's explosive, righteous temper towards such evil. The group walked over to a specific corner of the room where a specialized metal box rested. Inside the box was a large red button. Inside this box, there was also a slip of paper. Press the button, and all iron doors will open. Identify the mastermind in front of the police officer. If the number of witnesses exceeds 3, the police officer will immediately arrest the mastermind. Previously, everyone's attention had been entirely consumed by the letters outside, completely missing the slip of paper hidden inside this box. Reading the blood-red text on the paper, Ning Chushui realized this was yet another vital hint. But it didn't matter anymore. They already knew exactly where the path to survival lay. Without hesitation, he slammed his hand down on the red button. With an ear-splitting, agonizing screech of metal, everyone watched as the 8 rusted iron doors slowly swung open. 8 people radiating apocalyptic, gloomy auras slowly stepped out from behind their respective doors. Some of these people wore grotesque, viciously distorted smiles as they silently locked their dead gazes onto Ning Chushui and the rest of the survivors. Watching the people step out from behind the iron doors, Ning Chushui and the remaining survivors stood frozen in place, not daring to make a single reckless move. The sheer apocalyptic pressure radiating from these entities was overwhelmingly terrifying. To say these people behind the doors were awaiting judgment was a complete joke. It was far more accurate to say they were the lethal scythes waiting to pass judgment on everyone else. The nurse's legs had been brutally severed. Unable to stand, she could only drag her torso across the floor, hauling herself out from behind the iron door and leaving a thick, ghastly trail of fresh blood in her wake. All 8 people shared the exact same horrifying trait. Their faces were deathly pale, completely devoid of even a single trace of blood or human vitality. They stood silently in front of the terrified group. "Who is the murderer?" The victim's father spoke first. His voice was freezing cold, completely devoid of any human emotion. Coupled with the grotesque, distorted smile pulling at the corners of his mouth, it sent a violent shudder down everyone's spine. Anyone observant could easily notice that the moment the victim's father spoke those words, the little girl standing nearby began to tremble violently. In reality, Ning Chushui had kept one final crucial detail hidden from the group. Earlier, he had specifically instructed Shu Gang to deliver the 4th letter to the little girl's mother. Ning Chushui didn't send that letter hoping to receive a new, blood-stained clue from Wen Liang, the mother. He did it because he needed to verify one specific thing, whether or not the mother's body bore any physical wounds. This was a profoundly critical piece of information. If Wen Liang, the mother, had visible injuries, it would prove that the father was an indiscriminate domestic abuser. It would mean the mother had either tried to shield the little girl, or she was simply another punching bag for the monstrous patriarch of the family. But the horrifying truth was, the mother's body was completely devoid of any injuries. This definitively proved that the people violently abusing the little girl included her. If she wasn't a victim, then she was overwhelmingly likely to be an abuser. Thinking deeper, even if the mother hadn't actively participated in the beatings, the fact that she remained completely unscathed proved she had never once stepped in to beg for mercy or protect the little girl. Because if she had, the rabid father would have undoubtedly turned his violence on her as well. Therefore, in this twisted family, there was only one true victim, the little girl. This realization had initially solidified Ning Chishui's theory that the little girl, consumed by jealousy and festering hatred, had vented her apocalyptic resentment onto her newborn brother. But he had been dead wrong. Even Ning Chushui himself couldn't have possibly predicted that the little girl's true motive for murdering her brother was actually to protect him. This devastating revelation had struck him like a physical blow. He never could have imagined that such a hellish, demonic family could produce a child so heartbreakingly gentle and innocent. Right now, the victim's father asking that question meant the final apocalyptic judgment was about to descend. The murderer had to pay the ultimate price. The group remained dead silent. No one dared to speak, largely because Ning Chishui, who had taken the lead, remained completely silent himself. Seeing their hesitation, the victim's mother also spoke up. She let out a piercing, agonizing wail and screamed, "Who exactly murdered my son? Who was it?" The sheer volume of her shriek threatened to rupture everyone's eardrums. They frantically covered their ears, several of them doubling over in excruciating pain. Ning Chushui shifted his gaze to the silent nurse, Yun Wei, and the doctor, Wang Yu, who stood with his head bowed. Then, he looked at patient number 5, Guangzhou, who also remained entirely mute. Seemingly satisfied with the reactions of these 3 people, Ning Chushui turned his head to look at police officer Dong Kui, who possessed the largest and most imposing physique. He asked, "If we point out the murderer, will you guarantee our safety?" Dong Kui, a cigarette dangling from his lips, showed a flicker of icy detachment on his cracked, ghastly face. "No, but I will immediately arrest the murderer." Hearing this definitive answer, Ning Chushui finally felt a surge of relief. He raised his hand, pointing first directly at the victim's father, and then at the victim's mother. This couple murdered their own child with their bare hands. Hearing Ning Chushui's accusation, the deathly pale faces of the victim's parents instantly twisted into masks of unparalleled demonic ferocity. Apocalyptic killing intent erupted in their eyes. They simultaneously lunged forward, looking as if they wanted to violently rip Ning Chushui's head straight off his neck. Ning Chushui calmly took a half step back, his gaze locking onto Dong Kui. The police officer nonchalantly unhooked the heavy baton from his belt. Instantly, the enraged parents froze. They slowly backed away, their eyes glued to the baton, overflowing with absolute paralyzing terror. It was blatantly obvious. These two vicious, vengeful wraiths were utterly terrified of the police. "You are not permitted to attack the witnesses," the police officer stated coolly. Then, his stiff, rigid neck snapped toward Ning Chushui, his vacant, dead eyes staring holes into him. "You claim this couple are the murderers. Do you have witnesses?" Ning Chushui raised his hand again, pointing first at Nurse Yunwei, who was still slumped on the floor, then at Dr. Wang Yu, and finally at patient number 5, Guangzhou. They all saw it. "I have 3 direct witnesses. You can ask them yourself." Officer Dongquei nodded. He pointed a rigid finger at the 3 entities and demanded, "Are his words the truth?" The 3 people exchanged glances. Finally, their eyes subtly shifted, landing on the trembling little girl standing nearby. A fleeting, nearly imperceptible emotion flashed through their vacant, dead eyes. Finally, the 3 people actually nodded in unison. It was them. The 3 people stated with absolute, unwavering certainty. Witnessing this impossible betrayal, the victims' parents were completely consumed by panic. "No, no! They're lying! They're all lying! How could we possibly murder our own precious son?" Watching the hysterical panic on the faces of these 2 people, Ning Chishui felt nothing but profound, suffocating disgust. Perhaps, in their twisted demonic eyes, the little girl wasn't even their child, but merely a useless byproduct of their deranged lust. He recalled a time outside the Crimson Doors when he had cleaned up the aftermath of a similarly horrific domestic abuse case. Washing Machine had once told him something profound. In this world, practically everything you do requires a license or certification. Whether you want to be a student, a teacher, a cop, a driver, a chef, hell, even if you just want to screw bolts in a factory, you still need your ID card. Yet, ironically, bringing a human life into this world and becoming a parent requires absolutely 0 qualifications. At this moment, Ning Chushui finally, viscerally understood exactly how Washing Machine had felt that day. The 2 people were still desperately screaming their innocence, but Officer Dongquei ignored them completely. He pulled out a pair of heavy iron handcuffs and viciously chained the 2 people together. In the very next second, a massive, pitch-black hole materialized on the floor, the 9th door. The police officer unceremoniously dragged the 2 screaming people down into the abyss. Watching the 3 people disappear into the darkness, the survivors finally let out massive, shuddering sighs of relief. It's over. A smile finally broke across Chuliang's fat, sweat-drenched face. The paralyzing tension gripping the group finally began to dissipate. In their eyes, the apocalyptic ghosts trying to slaughter them had been successfully removed. However, mere seconds later, a sickening, grotesque screeching echoed from directly above them, forcing everyone to instinctively snap their heads up. Just a single glance froze the blood in their veins. Everyone saw the colossal, horrifying marionette violently tearing itself free from the thick, taut ropes binding it to the ceiling. No! No! The chubby Chu Liang, who had just mistakenly believed he was safe, was suddenly snatched up by the marionette's impossibly long, bone-white hands. He let out a single, agonizing shriek before being violently crushed into a bloody pulp right before everyone's eyes. Fresh blood and pulverized meat practically exploded from between the marionette's massive wooden fingers. "Run!" The one who roared was Dr. Wang Yu, dressed in his blood-spattered white coat. Seeing the marionette's massive hand plummeting toward them again, he violently dodged to the side. Ripping a heavy surgical scalpel from his pocket, he viciously stabbed it straight into the marionette's palm. The colossal monstrosity shrieked in pain, thrashing wildly. But Dr. Wang Yu couldn't buy them much time. The apocalyptic physical strength of this terrifying marionette was simply too overwhelming. In a matter of seconds, Wang Yu was brutally torn to shreds, his severed limbs raining down across the room. The survivors finally snapped out of their paralyzing shock. Without a second of hesitation, they sprinted desperately toward the gaping 9th door that had opened on the floor. In the cramped, chaotic space, Lu Meng practically dove headfirst into the gaping iron door on the floor the second it opened. Shi Cheng and Shu Gang scrambled frantically right behind her. Lu Chengfeng, eager to escape the slaughter, was just about to lunge forward when a hand suddenly grabbed the back of his collar and violently yanked him backward. "Careful!" The very instant Ning Shui shouted the warning, a colossal, blood-drenched wooden hand smashed violently into the opening of the 9th door. Bang! The deafening collision shook the entire room. Cold sweat instantly drenched Lu Chengfeng's body as he stared at the massive, splintered hand. He knew with absolute certainty that if Ning Shui hadn't yanked him back in time, he would currently be a flattened puddle of meat paste. Although they had narrowly dodged the apocalyptic sneak attack, the immediate aftermath presented a seemingly insurmountable problem. How the hell were they supposed to escape now? The horrifying marionette possessed 2 massive arms. As the thick ropes binding it to the ceiling continued to fray and snap, its grotesque, blood-soaked maw filled with razor-sharp teeth was rapidly descending toward them. Hit by the suffocating stench of rotting meat and dried blood radiating from the monstrosity, Ning Shui and Lu Chengfeng prepared to dive to the side. At that exact moment, they saw the grotesque, severed nurse dragging herself across the floor, frantically gnawing and tearing at the colossal hand blocking their only exit. A spark of inspiration flashed in Ning Shui's mind. He lunged toward the steel table, snatched up the nurse's severed, blood-drenched legs, and hurled them directly into the marionette's gaping maw. Patient number 6, still wearing his twisted, perverted smile, instantly lunged after the severed legs, diving straight into the monstrosity's mouth. Distracted by the sudden influx of food in its mouth, the colossal marionette instinctively retracted its arms. Seizing this fleeting window of opportunity, Ning Shui and Lu Chengfeng practically swan-dived straight down into the 9th door.
Swish!
The apocalyptic marionette seemed to harbor a specific, venomous grudge against the 2 of them. The absolute second they cleared the threshold, it violently slammed its massive hand down right behind them. The terrifying, freezing gust of wind generated by the impact made goosebumps erupt all over their bodies. They knew that if they had been even a fraction of a second slower, they would have been pulverized into meat paste. Fortunately, they had finally made it through the door. Panting heavily, Lu Chengfeng leaned against the cold wall, desperately trying to calm his violently racing heart. "Let's move." Ning Shui spoke up. The 2 men began walking down the long, pitch-black, seemingly endless corridor stretching out behind the door. The tunnel was completely devoid of light. The 2 had to practically feel their way forward, hands sliding along the damp walls. The suffocating darkness and absolute silence made them profoundly uneasy. Was this Crimson Door task truly over? If it was over, why were they trapped in this endless pitch-black corridor? Where was the dilapidated bus that was supposed to take them back to the ghost dwelling? A barrage of unsettling questions swirled in Ning Shui's mind, fueling his growing anxiety. "Be careful, something isn't right," he whispered to Lu Chengfeng. In response, Lu Chengfeng revealed something that made Ning Shui's blood run cold. "Brother, let me tell you something. Try not to panic." Ning Shui replied, "Spit it out." Lu Chengfeng took a deep breath, stopped walking, and lowered his voice to a barely audible whisper. We've been walking in circles." Ning Shui frowned deeply in the darkness. "Are you absolutely certain?" Lu Chengfeng confirmed grimly. "I am 100% certain. Over the past 10 minutes, we've already looped through this exact section of the corridor 3 times. This kind of looping, it's exactly like a ghost wall. Ordinary people cannot distinguish the loop relying purely on their sense of direction. Without specific countermeasures, having a good sense of direction is completely useless here. There is definitely something deeply wrong with this corridor." To prove his terrifying claim, Lu Chengfeng took off one of his shoes and tossed it onto the ground ahead of them. The 2 continued walking in the pitch-black darkness. Less than 3 minutes later, Ning Shui's foot violently kicked against Lu Chengfeng's discarded shoe. Scratch! A match flared to life, its feeble, flickering light pushing back the suffocating darkness just enough to illuminate their immediate surroundings. "Motherfucker, you actually have matches on you? Why the hell didn't you use them earlier?" Ning Shui was genuinely surprised to see Lu Chengfeng pull out a matchbox. Lu Chengfeng offered an incredibly awkward, embarrassed smile. I just remembered I had them. So many ordinary items are banned from being brought behind the crimson doors that I didn't even bother checking. Who knew matches were actually allowed?" Last time, I brought a small paring knife with me, and the Crimson Door confiscated it instantly. Hearing this, Ning Chushui froze for a moment. He suddenly recalled Bai Xiao pulling out a razor-sharp, intricate dagger back in Chiyu village. Could that dagger have actually been a ghost artifact? Ning Chushui shook his head to clear the thought. Forget it. Now wasn't the time to dwell on that. The absolute priority was figuring out how to escape this hellhole. But if this truly is a ghost wall, why haven't we bumped into the people who came down before us? Where did they go? Liu Chengfeng muttered, his eyes filled with profound confusion. His master had once lectured him extensively about ghost walls. This bizarre, supernatural illusion was supposed to affect anyone and everyone who stepped into its area of effect. If this corridor was a ghost wall, they should have bumped into the others a long time ago. Yet, in reality, they had been trapped in this loop for quite some time, and the corridor was completely, unnervingly empty. Under the feeble, flickering light of the match, the two men could see that the corridor was constructed entirely of solid metal, like a heavily fortified bunker. They walked forward for a short distance before suddenly spotting a massive puddle of fresh, crimson blood. The glaring, visceral red instantly put them on high alert. "Strange, it's gone," Ning Chushui whispered to Liu Chengfeng. "What's gone?" "That bizarre looping force. We were literally walking in circles just a minute ago, but now the path feels completely normal." The two stared at the puddle of fresh blood, realizing with chilling certainty that something horrific had undoubtedly occurred here recently. They advanced with extreme caution. Not far ahead, a black cylindrical object rested on the ground, but the light from the match was too weak to illuminate it clearly from this distance. They crept closer. "Is that Officer Dong Kui's baton?" When the black object finally came into clear focus, a freezing apocalyptic chill shot straight down their spines. It was undeniably Police Officer Dong Kui's heavy baton. Why the hell was it lying here? Could it be, did he encounter a lethal accident while escorting the prisoners? If the police officer had been compromised, did that mean those two apocalyptic people he was escorting were now roaming free, completely unchecked? Recalling the venomous, bloodthirsty glare the demonic couple had shot them right before being dragged down into the door, the two men shuddered violently. Right at that terrifying moment, the match in Liu Chengfeng's hand burned down to his fingers. It flickered twice, then died completely, leaving behind only a tiny, glowing red ember. Liu Chengfeng quickly tossed the dead match aside and struck another one to relight the darkness. But the very instant the feeble light flared back to life, the two men froze in absolute, paralyzing terror. Goosebumps erupted violently across every inch of their skin. They saw that the heavy police baton resting just a few feet away had vanished entirely in the blink of an eye. This horrifying discovery made both of their hearts violently clench. Could it be were there people lurking all around them? Liu Chengfeng forcefully swallowed the paralyzing terror threatening to consume him. Gripping the lit match, he took a slow, agonizing step forward. His legs felt as if they were made of lead. It was an inexplicable, primal sensation, as if every single cell in his body was screaming in protest against moving further into the darkness. But Liu Chengfeng knew they had absolutely no choice but to press forward. Just like that, after taking 3 or 4 agonizing steps, his right foot suddenly bumped into something solid. He immediately handed the burning match to Ning Chushui. Ning Chushui struck a fresh match and slowly crouched down. Under the feeble, flickering light, they finally saw what was lying on the ground. It was the corpse of Police Officer Dong Kui. The officer's body was riddled with horrific wounds, torn to absolute shreds like a discarded rag doll. With just a single glance, Ning Chushui could definitively conclude that every single one of these catastrophic injuries had been inflicted by razor-sharp claws and teeth. "Chushui." Liu Chengfeng suddenly spoke up. He didn't call Ning Chushui brother like he usually did. He used his full name. His voice stuttered violently, carrying an undeniable tremor of absolute primal terror. Ning Chushui snapped his head up, instantly understanding exactly what had paralyzed Liu Chengfeng. Illuminated by the dying, flickering light of the match, 2 deathly pale, apocalyptic faces materialized directly in front of them. It was the very same couple that police officer Dong Ke had just dragged away. The corners of their mouths were smeared with thick, fresh blood. As they smiled grotesquely, the group could clearly see chunks of the officer's raw flesh wedged between their stark white teeth. Especially under the erratic, dancing light of the match flame, their faces looked impossibly, demonically distorted. "You are the ones who murdered my son. I want you to pay with your lives." The father, standing in front, roared in apocalyptic fury. His bloodshot eyes bulged from their sockets as he raised his hands, lunging forward to violently strangle Liu Chengfeng. Liu Chengfeng desperately wanted to scramble backward, but his body completely refused to obey his commands. Watching the apocalyptic face of the father rapidly closing in, Ning Qiushui was just about to hurl the ancient book directly into the wraith's face, when a clear, innocent girl's voice suddenly echoed from the darkness behind them. "I am the one who strangled my baby brother." This single sentence made the father, who was inches away from crushing Liu Chengfeng's throat, freeze instantly. The two men noticed that upon hearing this voice, the man's bloodshot, demonic eyes slowly shifted, glaring past them into the pitch-black tunnel behind. It was a look of absolute, freezing, unhesitating cruelty. The mother also stepped forward. The two people simply stared into the darkness behind them, grotesque, twisted smiles stretching across their bloody lips. "You murdered your own brother. Now you will pay for it with your life." As soon as the words left his mouth, they completely ignored the two men and sprinted wildly into the darkness. "Run! Don't look back!" The innocent voice of the little girl echoed from the void one final time. Ning Qiushui whipped his head around, but there was only impenetrable blackness behind them. There was absolutely no sign of the little girl. He gritted his teeth and shoved Liu Chengfeng hard. "Run!" With no mental capacity left to process anything else, the two men sprinted blindly forward. Along the way, they stumbled across another mangled corpse. Although they couldn't see the specific details, based on the torn clothing, they instantly recognized it as Lu Meng, the woman who had been the very first to dive into the tunnel. Could it be? Are they all dead? The moment this terrifying thought surfaced, Liu Chengfeng couldn't suppress a violent shudder. Fortunately, no longer pursued or hindered by the vengeful wraiths, the two men sprinted for less than 2 minutes before finally bursting into a wide, open clearing. The area was shrouded in dense mist. In the dead center of the clearing sat a dilapidated, familiar old bus. Without a second of hesitation, the two men lunged onto the bus. Only after practically collapsing into the seats did they finally let out massive, shuddering sighs of relief. The bright interior lights of the bus finally allowed their violently racing hearts to begin to settle. They knew they had survived. "You guys finally made it," a familiar voice called out from the back of the bus. The two turned around and were shocked to see Xie Cheng and Xu Gang sitting in the very last row. "Motherfucker, you two actually survived? That's incredible." Liu Chengfeng flashed them a big thumbs up. Xu Gang shook his head. "We should be saying that to you two. How the hell did you manage to survive?" Liu Chengfeng proceeded to recount everything they had just experienced. There was absolutely no reason to hide anything. Upon hearing the story, the expressions of Xie Cheng and Xu Gang shifted subtly. It turned out they had also been saved by the little girl, allowing them to escape the demonic clutches of that apocalyptic couple. When they were hopelessly lost in the ghost wall, it was the little girl who had guided them here. Sigh. Despite knowing the full truth, the 4 survivors didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. They stared back at the pitch-black tunnel, their hearts incredibly heavy. Parents like that, upon discovering that their own daughter was the murderer, would absolutely never reflect on their own monstrous actions. Would they brutally slaughter their own daughter? Thinking back on the entire tragedy, the newborn baby absolutely didn't deserve to die, and the little girl absolutely didn't deserve to die. The ones who truly deserved apocalyptic retribution were that demonic couple. Yet, not only had those monsters completely escaped legal punishment in life, but they were now continuing their vicious evil in death. Liu Chengfeng slammed his fist furiously against his seat, snarling, "Motherfucker, how is this fair? If this happened in the outside world, I swear to God I would make that couple beg for death." The bus rumbled to life, denying them any more time to linger, and rapidly disappeared into the dense mist. "You guys are back!" Seeing Ningqiu Shui and Liu Chengfeng push open the doors, Tianxun, who was playing aeroplane chess with Meng Jun in the living room, immediately cheered. The two men nodded slightly. "Yeah. What's wrong? You guys don't look very happy," Tianxun asked in confusion. "You survived and came back. Aren't you thrilled?" Liu Chengfeng walked over to the sofa, grabbed an unopened bottle of soda from the coffee table, tilted his head back, and chugged it down. "Don't even mention it," he sighed heavily. After listening to Liu Chengfeng recount the entire tragic story of the Crimson Door, the bright smile vanished from Tianxun's face as well. Encountering a story like that behind a crimson door, it really is hard to just brush it off. "Are you guys hungry? There's still food in the kitchen." Liu Chengfeng shook his head. He completely lacked an appetite. He turned to ask Ningqiu Shui if he wanted to eat, only to discover that Ningqiu Shui was staring intently at Meng Jun. Meng Jun also sensed Ningqiu Shui's intense gaze. He looked down and realized that his shirt had come unbuttoned, exposing thick layers of gauze wrapped tightly around his chest, gauze that was currently soaked through with fresh blood. "What happened?" Ningqiu Shui asked bluntly. "None of your business," Meng Jun replied coldly. "I vividly remember that after exiting a crimson door, no matter how catastrophic your injuries are, as long as you return to the ghost dwelling, they heal incredibly fast. Does that mean you sustained those injuries out here in the real world?" Faced with Ningqiu Shui's razor-sharp questioning, Meng Jun refused to answer. He simply stood up and walked away. After Meng Jun disappeared upstairs, Ningqiu Shui turned his gaze to Tianxun. "What exactly happened?" Tianxun offered a bitter, forced smile and didn't elaborate much. "It's a bitter grudge between us and a rival ghost dwelling. The death of Uncle Mang was directly tied to them. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to support me.